Okay, we good to go?
Think so.
Okay, thanks, Kate. It's March 31st and it's 9:03 a.m. This is the Endangered Species Recovery Committee public meeting. I'd first like to introduce the committee members. My name's Lainey Berry from Department of Land and Natural Resources. I'm chairing the meeting. Can I go next to Kavika?
Hello, my kako, Kavika Winter, filling the Hawaiian seat on ESRC.
Thank you. Bob?
Hey, I'm Bob Reed. I'm the Deputy Director at the Pacific Island Ecosystems Research Center with USGS.
Thanks, Bob. Melissa?
Melissa Price on behalf of University of Hawaii.
Thanks, Melissa. Loyal? Oh, Loyal, you're muted.
Loyal Merhoff, I'm one of the at-large ESRC members.
Thanks, Loyal. And Michelle?
Good morning, everyone. Michelle Bogardus, representing U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so item one, I'd like to call to order this meeting, and I'm going to start with announcements. The first announcement is, unfortunately, we're going to have to defer several of the items that were on the agenda. This is item 4A, 4D, 4E, and 4F. So that's the NCL, Hanalei Bay, former Princeville Resort Kauaʻi, Sonesta Royal Kauaʻi Resort, and Sheraton Resort annual reports.
I'm sorry to hear that the consultant is unwell, but I'm curious why they don't just send another representative so we can get this done. Do we have an answer? I don't think that's acceptable.
Hey, do you want
I just
to?
unmuted. We have Lisa Bale in the room here.
Okay. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, if everybody can hear me, I am here present in the room. We had considered this week various alternatives to give presentations to ESRC today, but ultimately at the end of the week, staff decided it would be best to go forward when Reg David is available. So please be assured we did make efforts to try to come up with a different solution, and we will be prepared for presentations when everybody's ready to reschedule.
What are the requirements for reporting? Does anybody know? Or Linda, is there any reason to be concerned that they are not reporting today?
Well, I think it would depend on how soon we can reschedule their presentation. I mean, obviously they were on schedule to do it. They have turned in their annual reports. So, you know, the ESRC meeting is for the ESRC to review those reports. And I understand part of the ESRC's review is they'd like to be able to ask questions of the applicants or the permittees and of somebody who can answer those questions. And that is where the hang up is. So technically they have complied. They've turned in an annual report, and the ESRC is, you know, does have it and can review their annual reports. It's just the additional step of being able to then ask questions about those reports.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer, Linda. It's on the agenda. I would say we do not remove it from the agenda. I would say we use this opportunity to discuss any concerns we have. Whether or not they want to reply is up to them, but it's on the agenda. I want to discuss it. Can we keep it on?
From my standpoint, legally, yes, you can. You know, with the understanding that, you know, they may not be able to respond to any of all.
Well, that's their choice to not respond, but it's on the agenda. I'd like to discuss it.
And this is Lisa Bale, if I could address that. You know, our sole biologist, who's the appropriate person to present our annual report and answer questions about it, is not available today. I let staff know about that as soon as it was clear to me that he would not be coming. I feel my clients are at a disadvantage to not be able to present and respond to questions, and I'd like to have that opportunity.
Well, it's agendized. I want to talk about it. I think other ESRC members do as well. I'd like to hear from other ESRC members what you think.
Maybe just a brief follow-up. You mentioned that the annual report was submitted. Was it submitted on time?
This confirms our annual reports were submitted on time.
Okay.
So am I the only member who wants to talk about this today, or what do you guys think?
If we could just I just wanted to mention, we, as a follow-up, we are planning to reschedule our intent was to reschedule for April for those agenda items. So just to let the ESRC committee members know, we did plan to reschedule as soon as possible, as soon as we can get a date available. So if that helps the committee members.
Yeah, it'd help. Maybe they could answer some questions, but it's on the agenda. I think there's things we want to discuss today. So I say we keep it on the agenda.
I think I would concur. And Michelle, I see you're unmuted, so I do want to hear what you have to say. So go ahead, Michelle.
For the last couple of meetings, we've been challenged with situations where either we weren't provided a presentation or an adequate presentation, or we didn't have the right people in the room in order to answer the questions that this committee posed. And
honestly,
each of
I
those
don't like the excuse
circumstances,
of we have a bad consultant. I don't think that's a good excuse. Let's talk about it. It's on the agenda. Let's talk about it.
Sorry, Michelle, go ahead. I don't think you were done yet.
it's okay. Kavika, I understand that position. I personally would wait to hear when we can have Reggie and therefore have all the questions answered that we might have. And I think that that's kind of where staff were leaning. I think that Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, had offered to give presentations. But if we had any questions, only the biologist can answer them.
Yeah, but we have concerns as a board. This is an opportunity for us to discuss them. We've been told we can't talk about these things unless it's on an agenda. It's on an agenda. Let's talk about it.
I think what I'm hearing is that we might not be able to discuss the specifics of the report because the consultant is not here, but it would maybe be useful to discuss the situation of the consultant not being here and not having the opportunity, as well as some of the things Michelle mentioned, as far as this is the second annual review in a row where things were not delivered in a timely manner to us, at least, with opportunity for discussion. So I think that because we've been told if an agenda item is taken off or is not there, we can't discuss it. I would concur that it would be good to leave it on so that we are able to at least discuss the broader issues that we're seeing, even though we don't have the person here to answer specific.
May I speak to these issues? Before you go to Linda, may I speak to these issues? This is Lisa Bale in the conference room.
Sorry, Lisa, I just wanted to check with Linda. Is this okay to be discussing what I hear you, Melissa? I just wanted to check with Linda just to see if it's okay to just to have that kind of discussion right now.
If this is about what to have on the agenda or what might be deferred from the agenda, then yeah, it's appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I first wanted to take strong exception to the characterization of my consultant as a bad consultant. This was an unexpected health emergency that came up late last week. I waited the weekend to see if we might have news that he would be able to participate. And when he couldn't, I let staff know first thing on Monday morning. I did offer to give the presentations, but then was notified on, I believe, Wednesday that it was taken off agenda. So I therefore stopped preparing. I don't believe it's properly sunshined if it was in fact removed from the agenda today, and that's what we were told. We have been prepared. We submitted our annual reports on time last year. We were present to present them and answered questions. We submitted our annual reports for NCL, One Hotel, and Sonesta again this year on time. We had planned to be here present to present them. Reggie David, however, has a significant medical situation where he cannot be available. And therefore, I'm asking that we not consider them, because my understanding was they had been removed from the agenda today. I am not a biologist. I think it's appropriate for my biologist to be able to present the work that was done last year when it is discussed. And I don't believe it's proper for you to remove something from agenda and then discuss it anyway when my consultant that did this work last year for my clients is not available. So I would take strong exception to going forward today, and would also be concerned about due process for today's hearing.
Well, I still see it on the agenda, so to my knowledge, it has not been removed.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say that if it seems like the primary impetus for discussing today would be if the committee feels that postponing for hopefully a short amount of time would have expected conservation consequences. And I guess I'd like to hear what people think those might be, as opposed to what is the driver for discussing today in terms of the effects on the efficacy of the plans if we're able to discuss in a few weeks.
I think that's a moot point. Legally, it's on the agenda. I don't think it should be removed if we have things we want to talk about as a committee. The client or the person has, the companies have representation here. Whether or not they're able to answer questions doesn't mean we can't discuss concerns as a committee.
Can I make a suggestion? Because we do have other people who, the other presenters were told that some of the agenda items would be canceled or deferred, and so that their presentations would be moved up. So in the interests of respecting their time, the ones who are expecting to give full presentations today, I'd like to at least move forward with the order of the presentations that are ready. And at the end, for the agenda items that will be put on a subsequent meeting for full discussion, if we want to collect comments today so that we have a list of things that the committee is concerned about and wants to discuss next time, that might be helpful. We can all be better prepared at the next meeting, but we won't be really able to have a whole lot of back and forth dialogue. It'll just be the committee giving us feedback, which is still very useful, but I would rather do that towards the end rather than on the current agenda timeline, because then I'm basically delaying the people who are expecting to give presentations today.
I would be satisfied with that.
As long as those items aren't removed from the agenda, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thanks, Kavika. Thanks, Melissa. So we'll go item 2, 3, and then when we get to item 4, we'll do B, C, G, and H first, and then we'll go to A, D, E, and F at the end.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay, item 4 will go B, C, G, and H, because they're all ready to give their presentations today. And then once those are finished, we'll go to item A, D, E, and F.
Thank you.
and this is Loyal. I think I'd like to have Linda or Lainey tell us what actually, how the agenda, what is the official agenda? Because my little piece of paper has those kind of on it. But if it's been stricken and they're off the agenda, then I don't think we would talk about those. We can refer to them. I don't have a problem with that, but they're not, their presentation is off the agenda if somebody took it off and I just didn't know it was taken off.
I looked at the agenda. It's the agenda they sent this morning. It's on there.
So the agenda is the full agenda that was posted and that has been posted for this whole time. What Lainey was proposing to do was to defer certain items so that they could be rescheduled to another date when the biologist was available. Based on the discussion of the committee members, I understand that now Lainey is inclined to still allow the ESRC members to comment on those items. Obviously, we'll have to take testimony on those items as well, but to then move them to the end of the agenda. So it's just a question of reordering taking things out of order rather than, deferring them or striking them from the agenda.
So they will be deferred, and then we would still have Reggie rescheduled when he's available.
No, they're not going to be deferred. They will be taken up for purposes of allowing the ESRC to discuss them and express concerns with them, but they will also be another meeting scheduled for those specific items where Reggie will be available to answer questions.
And we're going to schedule that as soon as possible.
Okay, I understand that process. Thank you.
Okay.
For the record, my name is Mike Bellis. May I please make a comment?
Yes.
I represent the Sheraton Kauaʻi, Waipu here on Kauaʻi. And on Wednesday, March 29th at 5:13 p.m., Lisa Bale and myself received an email from Kate Collison. And in relevant part, it reads, "We agree with your request to defer those presentations. The ESRC will still meet Friday on the other agenda items, and we will reschedule yours once Reg is back in action." And there's a salutation where she extends the best to Reg David. I, for one, relied on this deferral, which I believe was on behalf of the ESRC. I believe, as Lisa Bale mentioned previously, that this is an issue of due process, and that having relied on this to our detriment, not having our client and consultant present or available, having ceased preparation upon receipt of this notice, I understood this to be an official statement on behalf of the ESRC that our item would indeed be deferred and that no action would be taken and that it would be rescheduled for a future date. Thank you very much.
Linda, does staff has the ability to do that 2 days before a meeting? You're muted.
That had been done in consultation with, with Lainey, obviously, and that had been her initial inclination, just because, it wouldn't be available. However, I do note that the 195D for the ESRC, one of your jobs is to review annual reports, and it doesn't necessarily require that the permittees make a presentation or even be there to answer questions, but it's for the committee to review and comment on annual reports. So it's appropriate to take it up for that purpose at this meeting.
But this is Loyal. I think the question is, under state law, sunshine laws, et cetera, if we have the agenda and it's there and we're supposed to be talking about it, and some people think it's taken off and some people think it's not taken off, like, does the public comment on those? If we ask for public comment on them, we may not have known that it was deferred, for example. I mean, I'm okay with deferring it, but I wanted to kind of know what's right so that we don't do the wrong thing.
So officially, they are still on the agenda. They have not been taken off the agenda until, it is either done in advance with appropriate notice, or when it's done at the meeting and the items are specifically deferred at the meeting, in which case that's the notice to everybody that those items are being deferred. So to take it up at this meeting is still appropriate under the Sunshine Law.
But I think the question is still, are we deferring today or not? So it's up to you, Lainey. But I think what I'm hearing from the SRC members is they don't want to defer the items.
they do want to have a further meeting with those 4 applicants or those four permittees, so that they can have a fuller discussion with their representative at that time, but they're not wanting to defer those agenda items for today. Is that correct, Kavika?
Yeah, I'm going to follow the agenda as posted. I'm okay with shuffling things around as needed. That's to be flexible, but posted agenda should be followed.
And this is Lisa Bale, noting my objection on the record based on due process grounds that this meeting has been scheduled, and I was told that this agenda item was removed. So I object to going forward today on due process grounds on my client's permits without my biologist available to discuss and present that annual report. I think it's prejudicial. I think it's unfair. And I think we should have an opportunity to present the work that was done last year and have the person who did that work give the presentation.
And you will be given that opportunity at a later date.
And for the record, again, this is Mike Bellis on behalf of the Sheraton Poipu. I echo the sentiments and comments of Lisa Bale and also object to the proceedings for the reasons I stated previously. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to go ahead with comments, but with the understanding that we will schedule another meeting in the future where the client can be available for questions and response. Linda, do we need to take a motion on this, or can we?
No, I think you can just start on the agenda.
Okay, so we'll go ahead. The other announcement is we'll also have to schedule another meeting, the next meeting for the Kauaʻi HCP in April. So just a heads up to the committee that you'll be receiving requests for scheduling another Kauaʻi HCP meeting in April. So please keep an eye out for that. Any comments from the committee? Any questions? Okay. So we'll go ahead with item 2, which is the presentation by Pacific Rim Conservation on the status of mitigation activities at Kauaʻi's Seabird recovery site and HCP administration. And we have Lindsay Young from Pacific Rim Conservation.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming today and listening to the presentation. So hopefully through the summary activity here, we'll be able to answer some of the questions you may have. I'm not going to be able to see you guys when I put this into presenter mode. So if you have a question at the time, feel free to jump in. Just make sure you unmute yourself because I might not be able to see what's going on the chat. Lainey, do you mind raising your hand just to make sure you can hear me? We good? Okay. All right, so I'm going to be going through the activities done. We are the prime contracting group to implement the Kauaʻi Seabird Preserve mitigation activities, as well as compile the summary reports for the end of the year. So outline a presentation. This is the same as it's been for the last couple of years. We'll go over the Kauaʻi Seabird Preserve management. We'll then transition into the summary report of mitigation effectiveness monitoring for the participant groups, take monitoring effectiveness, compliance monitoring and summary of changes, and then the financial report. Okay, so most of you are very familiar with these objectives at this point. There are kind of 8 consolidated objectives within the KSHCP. The first was construction of a 2-hectare predator-proof fence enclosure. That activity was completed in 2021. Second was installation of social attraction equipment, which I'll expand upon what that means a little bit later. This was also completed in 2021. And then eradication of predators from within the enclosures. This was completed in 2021. We did have an incursion this year that we had to essentially reinitiate eradication. And again, I'll expand on this a little later in the presentation. Monitoring for predator incursions within the enclosure. Obviously, this is continual and it was effective because we detected one. And then predator removal in the surrounding Kauaʻi Valley area to protect colonies that are not within the fenced area. Invasive plant control and vegetation control within the preserve. Monitoring of covered seabirds to see if they are in the preserve and nesting, and the monitor of any other listed seabirds or any other listed species within the reserve. Okay, and it looks like my slide might be cutting off a little bit, so I'll try and walk through all of these. This is the general timeline of the project. So as most of you are familiar, we started in the summer of 2020, really convenient time to kick things off. And a lot of the things that you see on the top several rows here were sort of the initial startup phase of the project. So 2020, 2021, we kind of consider years 1 and 2 to be the startup phase. And we're now within years 2022 to 2025, which are the maintenance phase. This HCP runs for 30 years, as most of you are aware. Our contract as the prime contractor is on a 5-year increment period, which is why I've kind of broken down the timeline that way. So we have the fence installation, sound system installation, artificial burrows done initially. And then we have some restoration, weeding, outplanting, botanical surveys. These activities were concentrated at the beginning, but are ongoing throughout the life of the project. And then we have predator control. So we have initial eradication activities, but then we transition more into long-term predator control in the surrounding area and just monitoring for predators on the inside of the fence. And then in terms of monitoring for listed species, we do acoustic and ground surveys during the seabird season. So Kauaʻi Seabird Preserve is just to the east of the Kauaʻi Lookout, for those of you that are familiar with the area. And it is about 10 acres in size and encloses the Kauaʻi rare plant enclosure. So we removed that fence initially, put up a predator exclusion fence. And the area is divided into 2 spots. We kind of have the existing plant area here on the left, and then the main seabird burrow area here on the right-hand side. So fence design, just review for those of you that might be new. Predator exclusion fences are generally 2 meters or 6.5 feet tall. And this is the height at which cats can't jump over them. They have posts 2 meters apart, and they have a skirt laid just under the surface, and then a kind of rolled hood that's on top. It's a little hard to see that in the diagram, but it's right here. The combination of these features means that animals cannot climb over, they can't jump over, they can't squeeze through, and that they can't dig under. And so far it's proven relatively effective across New Zealand as well as Hawaii. Sorry, slide is not transitioning here. Okay, so with the fence construction completed in 2021, this is a picture in the center of kind of what that looked like. We have been transitioning onto fence maintenance. And every fence that we have built within Hawaii, we're on our 10th now, I believe, has different issues altogether. So each fence is very different depending on the topography, the design, all of those things. And Kauaʻi has presented itself as a skirt maintenance issue. And so it's not necessarily on the slopes, as you might think, although we do get a little bit of erosion on the slopes. We have mainly had issues actually with feral ungulates on the outside, digging through and rooting everything up. So you can see activity here where it essentially raises the edge of the skirt up. And we believe this is probably how we got rodent incursions, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the team spent a considerable amount of work experimenting with various techniques over the last year. So this includes cementing the skirt down in some areas. On the left-hand side, you can see there is sod over here. And what we do is we actually cut the sod. We rent a sod cutter from Home Depot and cut it from the area nearby. So we're not introducing new material to the area, but we're trying to use vegetation to essentially secure it down. We've also tried various means of kind of excluding ungulates from the really sensitive spot. And it's mainly pigs that are doing this by having little mini exclosures on the outside to keep pigs off of the skirt. As well as doing control of the animals themselves. So the combination of things appear to be working, but this is going to be an ongoing issue at this site. Okay, so for seabird surveys, auditory surveys were done from May to August per HCP guidelines from 2 hours after sunset and then 2 hours before sunrise. So we did a total of 32 auditory surveys and burrow checks. And all 3 seabird species were detected in the area, which is great, but none are detected during ground searches. So what you can see, the acronyms here, NESH or Newell shearwater, HAPE or Hawaiian petrel, Bandrum storm petrel, and then the Hawaiian goose. So what we have is 1,477 detections in newel shearwaters with an average call rate of 58 per hour. We have 17 Hawaiian petrel detections, an average call rate of 1 per hour, and 9 Vanderum storm petrels. So not enough to do a call rate per hour. What we ended up doing was calibrating our survey mechanisms this year. And we discovered that, and the newel shearwater distance calibration that we did, the newels are much closer than we had expected. And so when we did this after using the sound system as kind of a stationary point and did surveys, 50 and 100 meters out from the sound system to get a distance calibration, it looks like we have a relatively dense colony of newel shearwaters right over this slope in the area. And with a really dense colony, our initial thoughts, or what has historically been thought of in social attraction, is that if you're close to a dense colony, it's really a good thing because you have a lot of birds to draw in from. What I'm beginning to think is that we might actually have the opposite issue, where being close to a really dense colony means we're competing with something that's much more attractive than our sound system that is not playing, calls at a rate that would mimic a colony like what we're hearing. So this is something that I just want to flag. We're actually doing research into this on a broader scale to see if there's actually a minimum distance that you need to be from these source colonies for it to be effective. So right now we don't have any birds on the ground, but we're hoping that we will get some in the very near future. And the way that we're going to get this is through social attraction. So a combination of auditory and visual cues and provisioning of suitable habitat. So we installed 100 artificial burrows throughout 2021 and 2022. And we use the sound system and remote cameras for monitoring in the area in addition to the ground surveys. So this is what the area looks like. You can see there's nice little Seabird condos all throughout here. They're half buried into the ground and they have essentially a double lid on top. So there's a 3 to 4 inch gap in the bottom, in the top right in here, and then a shade lid on top. And these are only halfway buried. And this is intentional to make sure that there is enough drainage and these burrows don't flood. They're painted with a reflective, thermally reflective paint that's used on roofs, and this keeps the temperature down. In the same area, we have speakers mounted that broadcast their calls, and then you can see we have trail cameras pointed at the speakers, which is usually the first area that birds are going to check out. So we have kind of a variety of placements for the burrows, whether it's on a slope or flat ground, but they're all immediately within the flyway where we're detecting the highest number of birds. Okay, so I said that we didn't detect any on the ground, but just want to point out that a fledgling newels was found actually by a contractor that we were using as part of our owl control program. And this bird was outside the fence and attempting to climb the fence to take off. This is on October 6th. So the bird was uninjured. It appeared that it just came down in that particular area and was trying to get out on its own. So they brought it down to SOS and it was released uninjured. So it appears that it's a bird from the surrounding area and not from immediately within the fence, but we did have one detection immediately outside.
Sorry,
Okay,
Lindsay.
so
Lindsay,
yep.
that looks like a fledgling, was that right?
Sorry, was it? I didn't hear the last bit.
Fledgling.
Yes, it was a fledgling.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and you can see the down around its neck and kind of on the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and the preserve predator removal. So what you can see here is the tracking tunnels throughout 2022. So mice, the last of the mice from the eradication were removed by about April, and we have not detected mice since. But right around that same time, all of a sudden we started detecting a lot of rats. And that could actually be part of the reason that the mice were finally eliminated, as rats are known predators of them. What we think happened is because of the continual skirt issues that we had, we think that a couple of rats may have gotten in and started breeding, or there may have been 1 or 2 that were left over from the eradication. We're not really sure, but we did have a long period of time without detection of any rodents. So we deployed tracking tunnels to keep on top of this and put bait out. These are all Polynesian rats, which is notable because typically we have black rats in the area. So it was one specific species. And we have not been detecting many of them. We have been at low level. We're assuming that we're close to getting these guys out of there. But we did have rats detected as a result of a reincursion or reinvasion.
Sorry, Lindsay,
In terms,
quick question.
Yep.
So there were no ratus is all excellence? Is that what?
yes, all
correctly?
excellence.
So how confident are you that there are no ratus in there? Very
Sorry,
confident?
say that again, Kavika.
How confident are you that there's no ratus in there?
At this point, fairly confident because they're able to actually see the bodies of some of the dead ones. It's not to say that they're not in there, but what we also see is Exelons, which is the Polynesian or Pacific rat, is substantially smaller than black rats. And usually when you have a black rat population there, you don't see as many of the Exelons running around like this. So the fact that the vast majority, all of what we're seeing are Exelons suggests to me that we don't have black rats. Otherwise, they'd be suppressing them in the same way that they suppress the mice.
Okay,
I don't want to say never, but we're not detecting them.
Got it. Thanks.
Mhm. Okay, so predator removal. In terms of the interior of the fence, we've never had to remove cats from the interior, which is kind of what we expected. The fence is one way, so any animals that were left in at the end can jump out. Our predator removal for cats, we have 32 trapping stations about 100 meters apart on the Kauaʻi Rim Trail and Alakai Swamp Trail. And in total, 6 cats were removed in 2022. We do active trail cam monitoring to make sure that the animals that we're removing are the ones that are being detected on our trail camera surveys. We also cooperate with other predator control operators within the area to see if they're potentially catching the cats that we see on camera and vice versa. So overall, the trapping has been fairly effective and the team has been good about switching up locations and lures to make sure it's still novel and interesting and that we're not getting complacent with things. So predator control in terms of rats on the outside of the fence. So most of the cat traps and cameras that we have, we put a good nature rat trap around them. And that's not only to trap rats because they're also seabird predators, but we don't want the rats removing bait that's targeting the other animals. So this is, again, outside the fence along our cat trapping lines. A total of 130 rodents were removed. And you can see here in Kavika, this kind of gets to what you were asking before. On the outside, vast majority are black rats, followed by Norway rats, and then a few Polynesian and mice. And these were able to determine to species because we normally have a carcass to work with. Okay, so barn owl control, which was done by a contractor, a total of 10 barn owls were removed, 4 females and 6 males. They were necropsied to make sure that they weren't actually eating any seabirds. There were no avian remains found in any of their stomachs. And so you can see the number of sessions depending on the time of year and the number of observations relative to the number of animals caught. So this is average or maybe above average for what we'd expect in the area. So we know that there are owls there, but they're able to be kept at relatively low level. And for contrast, when we do barn owl control at a couple of our seabird sites on Oahu, we might get 12 owls in one night, which is extremely high.
I got a question, Lindsay.
Okay.
Sorry. So
I hear, is there a question?
Yeah, this Kavika, is that all within the fence? Or are you guys doing around the fence, those that barn owl?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
So are they is that those barn owl control in the fence or out of the fence or both?
It's mainly outside, but immediately outside.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get on to the effectiveness monitoring and summarizing of where we are with various things. So these are the biological objectives listed within the KSHCP, and these are kind of the objectives I listed at the beginning. So construction of the fence and social attraction, the status on objective 2A was completed in June 2021. 2B, removal of predators from within the enclosure. Mice and cats are gone. We do have potentially several rats remain after a reinvasion in 2022. 2C, ground activity of covered seabirds at the mitigation site by year 4, not yet complete. So we're hoping that this will be happening in 2023, which is year 4 of the project. 2D, breeding activity, again, not yet complete, although it's too early for that to be complete. And then same thing for 2E and 2F, still too early within the project.
2G, maintaining high quality seabird habitat at the mitigation site by removing habitat modifying invasives is underway. The group also identified potentially new invasives that they want to target. So the list that was developed as part of the HCP is used, but we consider it a living document in terms of adaptive management. We want to make sure that if there are new weeds coming in, we take care of them. And then protecting nesting birds inside the mitigation fence and nearby source colonies through predator control. We just finished talking about that. And then another biological objective is annual protection of any HONU nests. That is not something that we do as the prime contractor. It's usually undertaken at the properties themselves, but there were no HONU nests this year.
Lindsay, would you like us to wait for questions until the end, or is it best for us to ask questions as you go?
Shoot, I don't know if there's something going on with my speakers. Melissa, I can't hear anything you're saying. It's very broken.
Okay, I think it's on your end because like I could hear Kavika's question. Can you hear me now?
It's completely broken on my end. I apologize. Are you able to type the question for me?
I could, but I don't think that is allowed.
Well, I think, Melissa, I think it is, well, Linda can correct me if I'm wrong, because we can all hear you and you're right, like we could hear Kavika just fine. So
I'm wondering if
I'm doing this by phone. I think this might be my computer, you guys. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me just connect by phone to make sure that I can hear what you're saying and keep the presentation up on the laptop. I apologize. If we want, do you want to hold the questions until the end and deal with all of them then to give me a second to connect, or do you want to? Okay, if we can hold questions until the end, I'll wait for my phone to get going here and we can get through it. Okay, Melissa, do you want? You want to try again, and I'll see if
sure. I think Lainey suggested we just hold our questions till the end, and that's fine with me.
Okay. Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties there. Okay, minimization compliance summary for lighting. There's really no change in the slide from last year. So the compliance that participant groups are required to do is deactivating non-essential lights, installing full cutoff light fixtures, shielding existing light fixtures, angling them downward, placing lights under eaves whenever possible, shifting lighting to coordinate with moon phase. And we'll talk about moon phase a little bit later because that was very apparent in this year's fallout patterns. Installing motion sensors so that they're not on all the time, decreasing lighting levels, decreasing the visibility of interior lights, using lightless technology or just not using them if possible, and planting vegetation around to reduce the visibility. So the combination of all of these things is meant to just reduce the amount of light pollution and general attractants for seabirds. And most properties were in compliance with this by the first year of the HCP. In terms of minimization compliance summary for predator control, there were 194 properties included in the KSHCP. 47 of those 194 were required to do predator control. Reasons why a property might not be required is it might not have lights on during the seabird breeding season or might not be subject to it. So only 47 were required to do predator control. Of those 47, 25 did the predator control. So we have 22 that did not do it. And these were primarily city and county of Kauaʻi properties. And this is an increase from 21 properties in 2021 and 16 in 2020. So even though we're not at 100% compliance, in terms of the number of properties doing predator control, it is trending upwards. In terms of how many animals were removed, a total of 274 were removed compared to 254 the year before. So an 8% increase in the number of animals removed, likely because there are more sites now being included. So the minimization compliance summary of predator control, this is broken down by property. There's going to be another slide that is exactly the same data, but different properties. So on the left-hand side, you have which participant group it represents and the location, whether they conducted predator control, the number of trap nights, and the number of predators per trap night, and whether changes were needed. And so a property was deemed to be in compliance if it did predator control during the duration of the seabird fallout season in general, and it had a sufficient number of traps depending on the size of the property itself. And so if there were changes needed, then it was placed or was described on the right-hand side. So in general, City and County of Kauaʻi, as we talked about before, has a very large number of properties and does predator control at a select number of them, but not enough to actually be fully in compliance with everything. And the main thing that needs to happen first at the properties they do predator control, the way it's being done appears to be effective. They just need to increase the number of trap nights to be in compliance. And then going on to the second portion, so you can see here, the remaining 19 properties that are category 3, i.e. properties with lights, they don't do predator control. This should not be NA, this should be just continue doing or actually do predator control. Another way to get these properties in compliance is to change them, I believe, to category 5. So if they reduce the lighting or are able to turn off the lighting, it wouldn't be required. So that would be another way to make it so that we're in compliance with this. In general, the rest of the participant groups were able to keep up with the minimum number of trap nights and the number of traps set. In terms of procedural on the predator end, there's a certain number of documents that are required to be submitted. It's not just whether they were doing it, it's whether they did the predator surveys for the appropriate length of time. So not everybody was in compliance in terms of submission of things on time and the number of documents, but for the purposes of this table, they did do the predator control. Okay, so minimization compliance summary for training and outreach. A total of 3,448 staff and workers associated with these facilities were directly trained on the monitoring and response of downed seabirds in 2022. This is compared to 2,068 in 2020 and 1,091 in 2021. The large increase is mainly that NCL had 3 ships operating during this time period, and so they have large crews associated with those vessels and trained those crews up on monitoring of the seabirds. In general, the quality of the materials and information presented across all participant groups was pretty high. And a lot of them had very nice PowerPoints on everything, including non-listed species that were related, such as wedge-tailed shearwaters. Okay, take monitoring effectiveness. So again, this is copied from the HCP, but just to review for everyone, what is required are detailed maps of the property, including structures, topography, anything unsearchable. And the search routes, like where they're actually going within that area. Do they actually cover the area that's needed to be covered? A description of the annual training for the searchers. So it has to cover the identification, seabird handling, what to do if you find a downed bird, etc. Time of year of when they're actually searching. So that should be between September and December. The frequency of the searches, which is a minimum of twice nightly. Time of day, so generally 2 hours after sunset and then a few hours before sunrise. And search methods, and this is important, if you're driving in a car and going quickly, you're not going to see the same amount as if you're actually walking and, poking around under bushes. And then the record keeping method, whether they use the downed wildlife form and photographs or whether they have their own. And then the presence of seabirds on the site. Seabird predators, which most people or most participant groups did, noting which predators were where, and then the number of searchers needed to cover the area. So a summary of the monitoring done at the various facilities. So again, this is broken down over 2 slides just so everyone's able to actually read it. These are the property or the participants on the left, the property facility right here, number of birds found, whether they provided their search routes, whether training documents were provided, when they did the searching, search time, and whether they documented everything. So there was a large increase in terms of the number of birds found this year, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So you can see that the vast majority of the properties had at least 1 bird documented on their property. One thing that is noted is a lot of the reports were not submitted on time this year, particularly groups that had multiple properties. So this makes it pretty tough to get this deadline lined up so that we can get these reports to you in time. So it'd be appreciated if this could be modified in the future. And then looking at essentially the hotel properties and Kauaʻi coffee, you can see again here the number of downed birds, and then whether they submitted reports on time and the compliance monitoring for everybody. And I think we're almost done here. This is the overall take report. So the number of birds and the date they came down and which property. So what you can see here is the vast majority of birds taken were newels. So there were no Hawaiian petrels, 1 Bandurump store petrel, and 28 newel shearwaters. The good news, even though there's a large increase in terms of the numbers, I believe there was only 9 in 2021, the vast majority were alive released. So 1 was found dead, and we had several that were euthanized later, and 1 that was unknown and found before the Seabird date, but reported by a guest on one of the ships. So you can see the vast majority of these actually survived. And when we took a look at this by fallout pattern by moon phase, there was a very distinct peak period here in terms of fallout during the new moon period. And so there was a very discrete time period that we should really be on the lookout for. And, you know, the Seabird fallout period and monitoring is determined by these moon phases as well as fledgling, but it would be good to be extra vigilant in 2023 during this time period because it was the peak for this year. Okay, total permitted seabird take calculated over 30 years. Again, this is the not moving total of how many each property is allowed to have of each species. And then this is their calculated seabird take, the total for what they have, lethal versus non-lethal, the breakdowns of everything. I'm sorry, I know this is probably hard if you guys not being able to ask questions. Okay, and so the KSHCP financial reports. This has been a challenge for us. So NIFWIF operates on a different reporting calendar than we do. So they essentially do a federal or state fiscal reporting, which is October 1st to September 30th. And they give us the amounts on that breakdown. But as you know, for this project, we operate on a calendar period. And so it's hard for us to calculate precisely what's going on a calendar period because of the way the report's broken down. And so I've provided essentially the total they give from the statement of financial activity for their operating accounts. This is what they're generally drawing out of. So at the end of September 30th, they had 91,849 in the operating account. And then in the reserve account, they had 663,899, again, at the end of September 30th. So we're missing the last couple months of 2022. But what I wanted to point out, so we went through our own records and I consolidated years 1 and 2 because that was sort of the implementation phase of the project. And there were costs that spanned both periods that were not recurring costs. There were one-time capital costs. So in total, we budgeted $975,387 for those 2 years. And the actual cost came out to a little over $1 million with an overage of $30,775.77. So we were about 3% over budget during the implementation phase. And that was almost exclusively due to an increase in the cost for the fence itself. So the cost for the fence, I believe, was more than 50% higher than what we'd anticipated. And so our overage was projected to be actually, I believe, about $150,000, but we were able to save some money in other areas of the project. So our overage was about 3% for those years. In years 3 onwards, there are 2 recurring charges that are going to occur. Through the implementation phase of this project, it's become clear that this is not a 1 or 1.5 person job. This is a 2-person job. And so we need to budget for having 2 people on board, which is, you know, salary rate plus fringe, and the need for rented office space. So the amount of gear that is required of this project was not anticipated at the start. We didn't anticipate having this much that we would need to be essentially storing in an office. And so we do have an office space associated with this project. So have been talking with the participant group about potentially different options for offices to reduce those costs, as well as how to mitigate for the staffing costs. But know that there are projected increases that we're anticipating at this point. And I believe that is it for the presentation. So what I'm going to do is log on the join again back on the phone here so that we can ask questions. And I will log off of the computer. So give me 1 second. And again, apologies. I'm not sure why my microphone's not working.
All right, Lindsay, are you ready for questions? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think we'll just wait. Sorry, Melissa, we'll just wait. I think she's doing some.
Okay,
And while we're waiting, I have to get to a medical appointment. So Jim Jacoby is taking over for me as the USGS rep, and I sent him some of my notes with a few questions. So I should be back on depending on how long this goes. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome, Jim. Okay, I think we're ready for questions. Melissa, do you want to? And for the committee members, you can just put your hand up if you have questions. But Melissa, do you want to go first up?
Sure, thank you. And I wrote these down. I'll just do one at first, and then if other folks don't cover some of the other ones, I'll pick them up later. The first one I wanted to ask about, you mentioned early on the social attraction. I don't know if you would describe it as a failure or just like a low response rate to it. And I know that I'm thinking about the KIUC one that we just have been thinking a lot about and had the site visit for, and how important that social attraction is, but also kind of the proximity to large other colonies of the newly constructed ones and stuff like that. I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more about how we might take some lessons learned from this situation to other things that are being planned, and make sure that we anticipate those and are able to do better for future ones. And also what you think the solution might be in this case, if it's not producing the number of birds that it's supposed to make up for the losses. You're muted.
Thank you for that. So there's multiple parts to that question. So first, I wouldn't consider this a failure. It's still too early to have birds on the ground. I would have hoped in a best case scenario that we would have seen them. But I'd say if we don't see anything by years 4 or 5, we should start to get a little bit concerned about that and determine what we want to do as a group to overcome that. In terms of social attraction, in a larger sense, there's 2 issues there. One, I think there's both a minimum and a maximum distance from the source colony that you need to achieve. We know that the maximum distance, you don't want to be further than 25 kilometers from your source colony, and that's been relatively well documented, but no one's really looked at what the minimum is. So you don't want to be competing with a natural colony, because as I kind of said before, that's likely more attractive than whatever you're broadcasting on the speaker is the colony itself that's right there. And so I think there's some sort of sweet spot, and I don't know what the answer is, but we're doing research into it. And in terms of social attraction, moving forward, there are, I believe, 3 existing social attraction sites now within several miles of each other on Kauaʻi that are presumably drawing birds all from the same pool of colonies. And so you're essentially moving the same number of birds around to within a finite area. You're not necessarily creating new birds, you're just moving them ideally into protected areas. And so there's kind of a maximum benefit that you're going to achieve at some point. And after that, it's going to be a little bit of the law of diminishing returns, because you're still pulling from a finite pool of source colonies in the nearby area. And so if social attraction doesn't work at this site, the idea is to generate a certain number of birds. There are changed circumstances within this document to address that. There are alternatives, which could be expanding predator control or management of other colonies to manage existing colonies, or there could be translocation if it's set to create a colony in this actual location. So those would be the 2 options in my mind that would also generate birds to offset take.
Okay, so just a quick clarification question. essentially the social attraction you're saying is moving them from sites that don't have the same level of protection because they don't have a fence into fenced areas where the reproductive success should be higher. What is that difference in reproductive success between inside and outside the fence? This is also something that came up at KIUC that I just wanted clarification on.
Yeah, so predation levels, the idea, assuming that there's no management at a site that they're coming from. So let's assume that the site that we're potentially drawing birds from doesn't have predator control. Reproductive success can be as low as 15% in procelariids up to about, I'd say 30 to 40% in totally unmanaged colonies. In managed colonies where there's very few to no predators, reproductive success, I'd say the average from the literature and our experience is in the 60% range. Up to about 80%. 80% is the very high range of what I would expect for that. And so if I was going for a target, I would go at the mid-level of the upper range, if that makes sense for a managed area, because you're not going to achieve your best outcome every single year. You should aim for the middle.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Loyal. Can I follow up on that?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are, again, this is trying to look at the efficacy of a predator-proof fence. So if you're trying to protect a colony with a predator-proof fence, that also obviously will control the predators inside that fence, versus an area that does not have a fence, but there is active control of predators, what would be roughly the difference in mortality that you would expect?
So the very not satisfying answer is it totally depends. And I will use Lanai Hale as an example. So we did an assessment for them of fence areas that they should fence and what the expected outcome would be afterwards. And right after they did that assessment, I think we did it for them in 2016 or 2017, they initiated they really ramped up their predator control program. So they're achieving 80% reproductive success for Hawaiian petrels without a predator exclusion fence. It's not really biologically possible to get it much higher than that, to be honest, because if you think of that 80%, there's a proportion of eggs that don't hatch, and then there's a proportion of chicks that don't fledge, and the reproductive success is those two multiplied by each other. So 80% is really exceptionally high. So I'd say in certain situations, you might not need a fence. If you have really good predator control, that is going to achieve an objective that's fairly close to it. But if you're not able to have good predator control and or your topography is such that you have a lot of immigration, it's going to be a lot more difficult to achieve that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, go ahead.
Hey, Lindsay, thanks for the great presentation. It looks like a lot of progress is being made. Just to clarify, though, in terms of number of birds produced, in terms of the offset that we're looking for, in terms of the take, it would be then the difference between your productivity that you find in unmanaged areas versus what you're finding in the managed area. So it's not just your total that you're getting in the managed area that you can count. It's just that difference between those two. Is that correct?
I guess it depends on how specifically the HCP is written. I don't remember the nuances of that. So I think there's two different ways you can look at that. It depends on how you outline your objectives specifically, whether it's a number of birds or a change in reproductive success. I mean, my understanding.
But I'm just saying in terms of a number of birds, if we're looking to offset a number of take, then you're actually looking at really that difference.
Yeah, using reproductive success as the means by which to generate more birds to offset the take, yes.
Okay.
And I think what I am hearing come through is that one of the things we should be keeping an eye out for is how the HCP is written, not to essentially just count a bird that moved over from one place to another. This harkens back to the bat issue, right? But actually something that is an increase in reproductive success and therefore is replacing the loss, which is the intent, I think.
Yeah.
Lindsay, related to the social attraction, if I recall correctly, there's clear adaptive management triggers and responses to assess where we are within the timeline of social attraction. Based on your presentation, it sounds like none of those triggers have been met yet. right? And that would
Right.
continue to be assessed as time moves on. And anything that needs to happen in order to address any deficiencies would happen appropriately under that adaptive management strategy.
Yeah, that's correct. And the reason why I flagged it in this year's is because the first year, as it's outlined in the HCP, that we might expect to see that is year 4, which is going to be next year. And so because we're in year 3, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind, it's really year 2 in terms of the social attraction, because we didn't have things going in year 1 because we wanted to wait until the fence was complete and predator control was underway. So from the bird's perspective, it's really year 2 rather than year 3. But I just want to keep that in people's minds because it's related to this as well as everything else that's happening on Kauaʻi. Because this project is not operating in a vacuum; it's operating within a suite of projects, even though it's different participant groups. All of that is still the same landscape and still the same species.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more committee questions or comments?
I have more questions. I just didn't want to, I'll definitely rotate out to others. Kavika, you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. So one of the slides you had is the same as table 10 in your report, which is on page 42 for my fellow members.
Let me pull this up here. So table 10 from final report.
Yes, I'm particularly concerned with the last column, which report submitted on time. There's a bunch of no's. We have historically had a lot of difficulties in getting these permittees to be fully cooperative in this process. So this is a history of frustrations on our end. It's hard for us to do our jobs when things aren't done as they said they'd be done or on time. So I have an open question. I don't know if it's for DOFA staff or for Linda, but what are the ramifications for not following timelines? Are there any?
So it could be a potential violation of their permit. If the timelines are firmly set out, definitely set out in the permit, and they're not following it, they could be found to be in violation of the permit.
Thank you. So what is the process by which we would determine that? Do we need to vote? Do we need to make a motion or a vote, or what's the process here?
I don't know, because there are really no rules that cover this right now. But I think it would be that, the staff would bring up a recommendation to the ESRC to consider. The ESRC would make a recommendation to the Board of Land and Natural Resources, and it'd be up to the board to do the violation, because ultimately it's the board that issued the permit.
Can I actually ask a question, since I wasn't involved in the planning process? Is there a reason why this specific project needs to be heard around the state? It seems to be on the March-April ESRC meeting. Like, is that tied to some specific regulation?
Not that I know of. DOFA, maybe you guys can answer why it's done that way.
Okay, we have 3 people in the room who all have strong opinions on why it was done that way. So I'm going to let Lisa go first.
This is Lisa Bale. I understand and recall from our discussions as we were developing this permit that the state has a reporting obligation to the legislature in August. And in order to meet that August deadline, we agreed that the permittees would submit our reports by January 15th, which each of my clients did. And then that we would have this meeting. I believe our permit says we will have it in March, not April. And that is purposely to allow staff enough time that they needed to be able to prepare that report to the legislature.
Yeah, and to add to that, I know that some of our other HCPs turn in their reports much later, but because we recognize that there might be the need for adaptive management and suggestions and follow-up and lighting minimization that would need to occur prior to the next Seabird season, we really wanted to get the reports from the participants pretty much as soon as the Seabird season closed, see how it went, see if there were any changes that needed to be suggested for the following year, and still allow them the time that they would need to implement those changes. So that was why this was set for this time of year, which is a little different than some of the other HCPs. I do recognize that in the HCP, the annual review window is very small for the actual ESRC review. It's like a 2-week window, which we recognize is sort of ridiculous, and also seems to fall on spring break, which doesn't work for a lot of the parents on either the committee or the agencies. So we have flexed that, but we do try to stick roughly within a month of that schedule, mainly so that if there are recommendations for actions that might take the participants a while to plan for, especially lighting modifications and, getting different contractors and things, that they need time for that. And we want those done prior to the next Seabird season. So that's why we have this schedule.
Okay. Yeah, I say that because I think for both myself as well as the participant group, because a lot of this falls on the holiday, I recognize that trying to prepare an in-depth report by January 15th is difficult because people take time off and life happens. But then the frustrating part on my end is, the process that we do before it comes to ESRC is participant groups submit the reports to me. I consolidate them, I read them, and it's usually about 600 pages worth of material. It's not insubstantial. It takes, it takes about 2 weeks of time for me to do that if I'm really cranking on it. So if it's submitted to me February 1st, and I get it back February 14th to the participant group because they would like to have the opportunity to comment. They usually take a week, which is pretty quick to comment. And that gives me a week to incorporate comments for the February 28th deadline to you guys. And so it's crunched for everybody, including ESRC. Like all of us, I think this is a pretty quick turnaround considering the amount of material. So I guess I was just wondering if there was an absolute reason why it had to be March. But it sounds like there is, so that you guys have time to implement things prior to August.
So that makes it all sound more egregious for having late reports. So Lainey, if we were as ESRC to formally communicate to the board that we believe that these participants are in non-compliance, what would that look like on your end?
Linda, do you want to comment?
So, basically, it'd be a recommendation by the ESRC for the board to find that they're in violation. And it'd be up to the board, probably with recommendation from DOFA and the ESRC as to what course they could take to correct the violation, or, whether or not there should be some penalty involved with the violation and what that penalty would be.
Well,
I just
just real quick, I think we should follow that course of action because this is very frustrating.
Linda, would that be a voting item that we would need to put on?
You wouldn't be able to vote on it today. You'd have to bring it up at a subsequent meeting anyway.
Okay.
So it's not on the agenda for today.
Right. Got it. Okay.
And it sounds like we will have a subsequent meeting since Reggie's presentations have been deferred, so we can maybe add it to that if we're requesting it. But I just want to note that in the course, I think it's relevant to this discussion that last year at the reviews, we had requested a 6-month update, given that we didn't want to wait a full year before seeing this again because they were pretty far out of expectations last year, and that did not happen. So want to note that in the context of the conversation.
Yeah, and I just also wanted to remind that we have requested that in future review, when agenda items are for review of annual reports, that we do have it as a potential vote. We have it as a voting item also, so that we can make these recommendations without having to defer to the next meeting. So please, let's make sure that's how it is in the future.
Got it.
Yeah, we've requested that several times, so please make that happen.
I also want to touch on Lindsay's comment on the timeline of the spring. If there is a better solution for the timing of the reporting and the timing of the ESRC meeting within that, they can't get the data done until the end of December because that's when the Seabird season ends, right? So there's nothing that can be done to move it forward. But if there are things that can be jiggered to make this more sustainable and beneficial for everyone in the spring calendar, then let's do that. But there would have to be an adaptive management action that is proposed and approved by the agencies.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that would be an adaptive management or whether it would just be an amendment to the permit terms.
It depends on how it's written, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Something that I've thought of, and I'm assuming there's going to be objections to this, but if we moved the participant group reporting deadline to February 1st, but if I was allowed to submit my reports to the participant group and the agencies at the same time, like I said, I usually block out 2 weeks. So if I got it to them by February 14th, that gives them some time to have comments, and I can incorporate those comments prior to ESRC. Would there be objections to that, recognizing that the reporting period over the holidays is a difficult window to meet?
Sorry, are these the reports from the participants that you're talking about?
Yeah. So sort of as a compromise, if participants were okay, if I submitted the draft report to them as well as DOFA, Fish and Wildlife at the same time without giving them sort of right of first refusal, then on my end, it would potentially be able to shave 2 weeks off of that so that a February 1st submission deadline for the participant group would be realistic in terms of giving me enough time to get it out. If I didn't, because I essentially have to go through 2 review processes before it's submitted February 28th.
So the reports should be coming direct from the participants to the agencies. I don't know, Kate, do you want to clarify that? Nope.
We're going to have to consult with the HCP because we need to see exactly what it says. But with all other permits, they do come to the agencies. And I mean, Lindsay is still responsible for compiling the summary report.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking for the regulatory process to move faster, the sooner we got the individual reports, the faster we could get prepped for annual reviews.
Yeah, and as far as Lindsay, whether or not you submit it simultaneously to the ESRC as you do to the applicant group, that's, I think, for you to work out with the applicant or the permittees, because, you know, that's between you guys. It's just a question of when we get it, and, you know, you already know what our preference is.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, I have a related question for Linda. Is it, if we were to go ahead with this vote and say that we think it's non-compliant, is it the entire HCP that's in non-compliance or individual participants? Are you able to parse out individuals, or is it a package?
Oh, yeah. Each participant has their own permit, so it would be each for which permittees you would want to find that they're in violation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of quick questions, but I don't want to, they're just sort of minor things. I don't want to steer away from this discussion. So if the committee members have any follow-up questions or comments on what we've been discussing, I think you should go ahead.
I have a big question, but so I'll just go with Lindsay.
Okay.
You're an amazing biologist. I respect you as a scientist. What we're supposed to be assessing is cumulative net benefit. In your professional scientific opinion, are we achieving that?
I don't know that I can answer that yet. In terms of Kauaʻi Preserve, not yet. But again, still a little early. In terms of the impact on the surrounding colonies, it's hard to tell that without doing surveys of the colonies themselves. But I do feel like the team is doing effective predator control, and it's specifically chosen at ingress points into nesting areas. So I think, yes, we're having a net benefit to the species. I don't know that I could put a number or quantify what it actually is yet, though.
Okay, could I make a little bit request in the future, since you've been talking about impacts outside of the fence line? Could you maybe make a polygon of what you think that is from your scientific opinion?
Yes, and I can send that. Part of why I don't include it in the annual report because trapline data is sensitive and we do have vandalism issues, and so it's specifically excluded from that. But I can provide that to anyone upon request.
Thank you.
So Jim, go ahead and then I'll follow.
Oh, I was just going to say, you can just make that as a polygon. You don't have to show the trap lines.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Let me make note of that.
So along the lines of what Kavika was asking, there's those two sides to the net benefit, right? There's both the plus and the minus. So the work at the seabird colonies is the plus, where you're trying to increase reproduction to outweigh the mortality that's happening at the due to lights at the different sites. But I saw what 50% are not doing predator control of 50% of those of the 50% that are doing predator control. It's inadequate, and so how does this affect the calculations of take? Because how can you actually determine whether the net benefit is there without an accurate calculation of the loss and the assumptions? The benefit of if I remember, the percentages that they were asking for were pretty high. They've got to demonstrate that they're actually earning that, that the number detected are the number that were downed, right? To me, if you're not doing predator control, there's probably a pretty darn big gap between what you're detecting and what actually was downed at the site.
That is probably true. And almost exclusively, the participant group specifically that is not doing the right number of properties or the number of nights is Kauaʻi County. And that's because they have the lion's share of the number of properties. And yeah, it would underestimate things. Or sorry, overestimate the positive impact and underestimate the negative.
So I just note that in addition to the concerns regarding submitting report, I would add to that when we're discussing this for the next agenda item in the next meeting, concerns regarding not meeting predator control requirements. Jim, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, and I think to be more direct, it's really a question of the take monitoring. In terms of whether an effective job is being done in terms of take monitoring. I mean, the predator control is just how to offset some of the scavenging of those that would reduce your ability to find them. And frankly, we're very concerned in terms of the low levels of searcher efficiency that have been demonstrated. And I think that's one area that I really would like to see beefed up considerably. And actually, I would really recommend we consider having a third party, if nothing else. I mean, I've always felt third party monitoring would be best anyway, but if nothing else, at least a third party random check that would be occurring to see whether the take monitoring is actually fine. When they do, and if the work with the decoys, that's one thing. But when we're talking about the real birds, that's another thing altogether. And in past presentations that Andre and others have done, we've seen that it's really hard to find a lot of the birds, especially when they scurry away. And so I think that's one area that I really feel we need to beef up considerably.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Michelle?
I'll add on to Jim as well. To put a really fine point on it, the agencies have an obligation, any SRC has an obligation to assess whether or not the searcher efficiency, so their searcher actions in combination with their predator control, is leading to a detectability the same detectability that was assumed at the time that their take estimate was calculated. And if it's not, we have a problem. It doesn't necessarily always need to be beefed up in every circumstance, right? It's a question of whether or not it's the same assumptions that were made at the time that the take was originally calculated. And I don't know if we have that for everyone yet. I think that there was progress this year, and looking at the data, I see that progress. There's certainly some properties that made a dramatic shift in their searching and predator control that has led us to have much more confidence in their detectability. And their detectability at a rate that is appropriate given the assumptions that were made in their take estimations. But there are some permittees that I still think have a long way to go.
I would agree with that, and I think another reason for us to find them in non-compliance.
So last meeting, we asked about the potential for keeping minutes and having a good record of kinds of things we're asking for here, and ensuring that then the next time we meet, we can actually review and say, okay, we asked for these things. Can you follow up with us on what's been done for those things that we requested? And I just wanted to ask, in the context of this very important discussion we're having and these very specific items, is that happening? And will we then have follow-up at the beginning of the next meeting and an agenda item saying minutes and review of minutes, so that we're able to follow up on items as needed?
Yes.
Go ahead.
We're taking note of this. Thank you. We hear the message, and we'll have for the meeting that we've yet to schedule, which we'll be reaching out shortly, the follow-up meeting to this in April. We'll have minutes from this meeting and the agenda items you requested. But feel free to, communicate those via email too, if you choose to do so.
Kate, sorry, Lainey, do you mind if I ask Kate Cullison a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you confirm, I think that you had mentioned that the letters that the agencies had sent for each permittee did get sunshined and that are available for ESRC members as a summary of the concerns expressed last year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So point being, Melissa, a summary of the collective concerns that were expressed last year are in those individual letters.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what I'm looking for is that I can't tell you the number of times over the years that I've been on this now, the short number of years I've been on here, where we say, boy, I think last year we asked for this, we're still not seeing it. And so what I'm asking is that we're more intentional about identifying those in the minutes and having an agenda item on the next agenda that is a review of minutes at the beginning, where, I mean, it's pretty standard practice across meetings, right? You take a look at the minutes, you say, here's what we covered last time, here are the action items, here's what we've done, and then we move into the next agenda. And that just ensures that we close the loop and everyone's time is affected. And the comments that we've made before, we don't have to make 5 times again. So just want to make sure we close the loop on that. The final thing I wanted to just ask about is, I heard Lindsay saying that there's some over budget issues, and I'm just wondering, I don't know who can speak to this, but the legal aspects of going over budget and what might need to happen to address that. And so I know Lindsay went over what needed to happen. I'm not sure if it's Linda that needs to speak to that or whom, as far as like if to remind the ESRC of if something's going over budget, what needs to happen.
This is Lisa Bale, if I may address that question. So we have a contract with Pacific Rim Conservation, and there's a change order provision in that contract. And I assume that's the dialogue that we'll engage in about changing the terms of that contract.
Yeah, basically the expenses issue is between the prime contractor and the permittees.
I said I did just get an offline message saying there might be an office space solution for us. So we're continuing at least to investigate the office space issue because that's the most easily solvable. We can't necessarily solve the 1 versus 2 person issue by cutting a second position, but the office space, I think there's definitely room to work with.
Okay. Loyal, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have one question for Lindsay and then a couple suggestions on the big picture kind of thing of the HCP, not the individual PIPs. That I guess we go into that next. Is that correct, Lainey?
So the next, you mean what's the next agenda item?
Yeah.
Next agenda item is the search for efficiency validation trials report from the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project, and then we'll go into the individual reports for item 4.
Okay. Okay, so then I have, I guess, then one question for Lindsay, and then just a couple questions on general aspects of the HCP, and then after the presentation on the search for efficiency, then I'll have 2 or 3 more questions, concerns that I'll probably mention. So for Lindsay, the first one is, this the presentation got almost all my pre-done questions I was going to ask you, so I don't have too much to harass you because you did a good job of addressing what I needed. But on the actual site, that was kind of a teeny plant site that was then expanded, so to speak, to incorporate the Seabird stuff. So what has your plant monitoring shown on that? What's been the response to the teeny plants that are in that area?
So we partner with the state on this, and we've been trying to design with them a program that they can implement to look at the impact on the TNE plants. But because it's not specifically part of this project to monitor the efficacy of the plant reproductive success or recruitment or anything like that, we don't do much beyond monitoring for TNE plants in the Seabird area. So in our agreement with DOFA on this, we do have a very clearly delineated area so that we don't accidentally trample something that's really critically endangered, and vice versa, so that there's not potentially impacts to seabirds. So even though it's one area, we do kind of break it down that way. But I think it's really an opportunity for someone to come in and take a look and do some control experiments or just monitoring on what the impact is to the plants. We're assuming positive, but I honestly don't have that data.
So for the area that you are working in, that you're at least tracking to see whether you're having any impacts, have you damaged any of the TNE plants in there?
No.
Okay.
No, it's a net positive because we're also removing a lot of the pretty invasive weeds that are spreading out.
Okay. And, one suggestion based upon what you had presented was that would be to work with the state. Is that state parks or is that DOFA on that?
It's DOFA. So we do work with their botanists in there.
Yeah, we'll see about trying to get some outside the fence pig control, since that would be obviously helping you and helping the ecosystem in general.
We are doing the pig control. It's yeah. So we have been doing trapping whenever possible, right around the fence, and it hasn't been super effective right now. Thankfully, there's no pigs, but we have been doing pig control.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll save my other questions for questions and concerns till for later. Thank you.
Okay. I just had a couple of quick questions. Lindsay, am I right? You can't bring up the presentation again? Did you switch to?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's okay. Then I just had a question about, you mentioned the cat. I think I got a little bit turned around that you're talking. There was the slide that had the cat in the photo approaching the trap, and then you mentioned what is it? You mentioned good nature traps at cat cameras.
Yes.
Is that because you had cameras on cat traps and you were worried about rats being attracted to the cat trap, so you put the good? I was a little bit confused about that.
Yeah, so we have a trap line and we have remotely transmitting cameras, and this is so remotely whether something's in the trap, whether something's messed up the trap, or like if a rat has gone in and essentially rendered that trap ineffective. So the camera trap monitoring, and then the rat traps are to make sure that the rats aren't getting in there and taking all the bait and making it unavailable to cats. So it's kind of a combination to make sure it's being as effective as possible.
Okay, yeah, got it. Sorry, I saw a cat camera and I thought it was more sort of general monitoring, looking for cat activity, but it's specific to the trap, right?
It does. We do have a couple cameras that are out there just to do cat activity monitoring, and the camera also tells us, whether the trap's being effective, because some animals will come up to it
check it out, and then walk away. And so we know that animal's in there. So it's a combination of both.
Okay. My question is, that's helpful. You also talked about rat monitoring. Are you using the tracking tunnels for that?
Yes. So we do rodent monitoring when we don't have a suspected incursion quarterly within the fence, and those are tracking tunnels. Basically, the long cards, they've got cardboard on either end and then an ink pad in the middle, and you put peanut butter in or some sort of bait. Rats run through, and you get their footprints on the card. So that's our sort of passive rat monitoring system within the fence.
Okay. My comment is we're finding a lot of we're starting to learn that those monitoring techniques might not be very effective using a combination of the tracking tunnels and cameras. We're finding that tunnels are missing a lot of rodents. So you might want to think about using like a combination of the tunnels and cameras, especially inside the fence, and outside too, possibly. But just something to think about.
Yeah, we do have a lot of cameras inside the fence, and they're primarily for bird monitoring, but we do check them for rodents. So in a way, we kind of have a built-in double system, even though it's targeting other species. Okay,
great. Yeah, that's good. Okay. I had a question about the unknown Newell shearwater for NCL. It just said like unknown date, unknown outcome. Can you elaborate on that at all? Or is that?
No, I can. So apparently there was a Facebook post from a guest on one of the ships that somebody saw and reported in. And so the bird was unable to be located. It was able to be identified as Newell shearwater from that picture, but we weren't entirely sure of whether the date the picture was posted was the date the bird was found. And that's why it's an approximation of a date and then unknown status.
Okay. And obviously that's concerning that was not reported officially, but because Facebook is not an official. Sorry, go ahead.
I believe that occurred after the fact. Like, I think it was a while later, is my understanding. Lisa might be able to better clarify that, but I don't think it was found or reported immediately to NCL either.
Okay.
This is Lisa Bale, if I might address that. So this is a topic we will cover when we give our annual report presentation for NCL at the next meeting. That was a bird that was reported on social media. NCL was not aware of the bird until hearing about it from the agencies. We've included the information in our annual report. We did include that bird in our take count because we were aware of it. But we could not report it because we didn't have anything other than the photo from the agencies that we received after the fact. So we didn't have any additional data on where it was found or GPS locations, all of those things we would put in the report, but we did dutifully include it in our report, and we'll again include that in our report at the next meeting.
Okay, I'll save my rest of my questions for then. Thank you. My final, it's just a very minor thing. Just in terms, for the benefit of the public, Lindsay, I was wondering if you could avoid use of the 4-letter acronyms for birds and use I know we birders love them using them, but it's very confusing to the public if we've got, we've already got, Hawaiian name and English name, and using, I know they're nice to use in tables, but I think it would be helpful to include, English or Hawaiian, or preferably both names, just for the benefit of the public.
Okay. No, that's a good point, to make sure it's consistent and easy to read. We can do that in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks. Do we have any more committee questions or comments for Lindsay? Okay. Do we have, I just want to check if we have any public comments or questions first of all, in person in the meeting room. No. And is there any, if you are online, any members of the public online who have any comments on item 2? You can raise your hand or turn on your camera. We have a lot of people online. I'm not sure if who's from the public and who's participating. I don't see any hands raised, so I'm assuming that's a no. So I think we're finished for item 2. Thank you, Lindsay, very much. That was an excellent presentation. We're going to take a short break now for recess so we can take a breather. It's 10:42, so I'd like us to come back at 10:50 for item 3. Thank you. Hey everyone, when the committee members are back, can you just turn on your cameras so I can see if we have quorum? Yeah. Just waiting for Jim and Loyal. But we have quorum now, so that's good. Okay, I think we should move on. We've got a lot to get through today, so just in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to item 3. Which is the presentation by the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project on the 2022 Searcher Efficiency Validation Decoy Trials. And we have Dilek Sahin here to give the presentation. Thanks, Dilek.
Hi, everyone. Just one note that Johnny from the KESRP team will make the presentation. I will just make a small introduction. And so we are, both Johnny and I, representing the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project. And we did the searcher efficiency trials this year. We initially planned to carry out these trials at 3 participant facilities, but because Hotel 1 Hanalei was still in the construction phase, we decided not to do the study there because it wasn't safe for us to really work there, and also because the access was completely limited. So anytime our staff is going there to deploy the decoys, the security staff will know that we are there. So Johnny will present the results from these 2 sites, and we use the same method. We had some minor changes, and it will be all in the presentation. So Johnny, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Let me just get the screen shared real quick. Okay, so similar to Lindsay, I will be in full screen mode, so I won't be able to see if anyone has any questions. There's kind of 2 natural breaks after I present the results from each participant that maybe we can open it up to questions relating to the results from each property. And then at the end, just have general questions about anything else. So I will go ahead and start. As Dilek said, I'm Johnny Shepard. I'm the field assistant for the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project. And I was the one primarily on the ground every so often, deploying the decoys, collecting them, interfacing with the staff if need be, and collecting the reports, and then summarizing data and providing weekly updates. So just quickly, here's the outline. Just wanted to touch on why we're doing this again so soon after last year, and kind of what are the impetus for repeating these in the future if it needs to come up again. For anyone who's not aware, we can go over kind of the basic overview and methods that were used in 2022. Like Dilek said, a lot of the general methodology is the same as in 2021. We did make a couple of changes, which I will touch upon, and then go over the results by each property, and then just share some of our recommendations and observations from the study. So why are we doing this again? First off, the searcher efficiency trials, they were designed to test the participants' estimated discovery rates in their PIPs. And so the searcher efficiency trials can also help inform adaptive management strategies that properties take in the future. And the trials can help test the efficacy just to make sure that the minimization measures or changes to the way property searches are producing the intended outcomes. So we're doing this again this year at 2 of the properties that showed lower than expected discovery rates, or the searcher efficiency rates. Those 2 properties being the Royal Sonesta in Lihue and the Sheraton down in Poipu. These are the results from all of the properties that were tested last year. And as you can see down at the bottom, Sheraton and Royal Sonesta having 5% and 17% were low compared to many of the other properties. And they asked us to reevaluate them following changes to their own respective practices and ways that they went about their down seabird searching. So as a refresher of some of the general methods, we intended to deploy decoys throughout the fallout season, that being September 15th to December 15th, due to some delays in the project implementation. We actually weren't able to start until about the first week of October, but in future years, we will aim to start on September 15th. Each property received 20 total decoys. These were randomly distributed across the entire property. We split the decoys into 10 placed in cover and 10 decoys placed in no cover or out in the open. Cover type was further broken down into partial versus full cover, although that was more of a determination based on the closest available cover to that randomized point. We didn't go into it saying we were going to place 5 in partial versus 5 in full cover. It varies between sites, as it did in 2021. And just some of the ways that we determined the cover type was based on the distance that it could be seen, if there was any overhead cover and how close that cover was to the decoy, and the general illumination of the decoy or in the area. Illumination wasn't the greatest of determining factors, because a decoy, for example, out in the open of a field, even though it might be dark, is still considered in the open. Anywhere between 3 and 0 decoys were placed during each visit. We included the 0 decoys or a blank visit for the same reasons that it was done in 2021. And this is just to help reduce any biases that might occur from staff at the properties beginning to recognize me as I spent more time throughout the season on a property, and just so that there's not as strong of an association between me being there and there always being a decoy. Decoys were deployed between 30 minutes and 2 hours after sunset. At this point, it was rather dark out, and it also ensured that all the decoys were in place before any designated searches that were being done by the properties. And then I retrieved all of the decoys starting 40 minutes before sunrise. This is a slight change from in 2021, in which they were retrieved starting 30 minutes before sunrise. We made this change after consulting with Stephen Rossiter, who led the 2021 survey, who felt that it was quite light out 30 minutes before sunrise, and even to an extent 40 minutes before sunrise. And with the limited knowledge we have on down Seabird behavior, we just made this change because we thought that all of the seabirds would be in cover at this point. And we compared the 2021 data between 30 minutes and estimated change to 40 minutes, and no decoys were found within this 10-minute change period. So we felt that results were comparable between both years. And touching on the randomization, this was just, we tried to randomize as many factors as possible to reduce experimental biases from both our side as the researchers and the participant side. So like I mentioned, the decoys were randomly distributed across the entire property. The number of decoys between 0 and 3 was also randomized. Deployment dates were randomized throughout the entire season. I'll touch on this again later, because we did make a slight change here. And then the cover type, so either in cover or in no cover. And this was, the cover type was predetermined. Sorry, it was predetermined before I went out into the field, and I just placed the decoys in the closest available cover type that was available. So I'll quickly go through these just as examples of the cover. So open or no cover, I kind of use those terms interchangeably. These are the decoys that you are probably just going to stumble upon. It doesn't require changing your body position, kneeling down, or bending over to look under something. There's no immediate overhead cover. I kind of like to think that it simulates a bird that might have just recently come down, or that is otherwise injured, or possibly a dead bird that's just kind of ended up on the ground wherever it came. So moving on to the cover types. So partial cover. These are ones that require a little more active searching. You might need to go out of your way, but they're not in a extremely dark area. They don't have a high level of cover. You're kind of unlikely to just stumble upon them. And I know it's kind of dark, but the decoy under the stairs, this picture was taken during the day, so it's a little more visible, but it kind of just exemplifies my point that it needs a little more searching. You're probably not going to see that if you're just walking that path due to the level of illumination under those stairs. But with a flashlight, or if you were actively searching there, it would be rather easy to see. And finally, the full cover type. These are kind of representing a bird that's found its final destination hiding spot. It's looking for that dark cover, that burrow-like structure. And these are going to take a lot more work to see. These are the ones that even well-trained biologists are going to struggle to find. And you can actually see the decoy on the bottom picture, but it's in this gap between the catamaran and the surfboards. So it really requires a dedicated search. So if these decoys are being found, it kind of shows that a participant is really going out of their way to search areas that are likely to have seabirds potentially hiding in them. And then some examples from this year of live birds that kind of just show these types of cover. Obviously, the open one is very easy to find. This partial cover, it was pretty dark in that area, has a little bit of cover from that vegetation and blends in with the ground. And then this full cover was up against, I believe it was up against the edge of the building under this vegetation line, which I'm very impressed that they found this bird. So some of the changes that we made, DLEC gave presentations to both participants before the trial started or during the first week. We had a presentation just going over the general information about the seabirds, identification, best practices for finding those seabirds. And then following that, she walked around the property with the members of staff who were doing the dedicated seabird searches, pointing out areas that might require additional searching or just issues that might arise during downed seabird searches. And this is something that we would recommend in future years for any participant who's interested, just as a general refresher before fallout season, even if they're not being trialed that year. So some of the other changes that we made, as I mentioned, we did move the reporting cutoff time from 30 minutes to 40 minutes prior to sunrise. We were able to visit both of the sites on the same night. That was a problem that Stephen ran into in prior years, just due to the number of sites that he was surveying and their locations around the island. This isn't something that is necessarily going to be feasible in future years. It was just kind of a product of having two sites that were relatively close to each other. We decided to no longer do the midnight deployments. And this was in consultation with Stephen. He felt that his ability to deploy the decoys was compromised during the midnight deployment, simply because he was generally the only person walking around. And so it kind of increased the likelihood that people would begin to associate him or I, if I were to do that, with the decoys, and might lead to increased searches in the future if they were to see us again. And as far as the stratified random deployment schedule blocks, this is how we determined the deployment date for the decoys. So we kind of broke up the fallout season into 4 periods. We wanted to represent the fluctuation in fallout intensity throughout the season. So this graph of the fallout versus moon illumination is taken from the KSHCP document. And it just shows that the majority of birds that are falling out are coming down in October, another smaller pulse in November, but birds can still fall out throughout the entirety of the season. And by doing this, it also helped reduce some of the extremes that can arise from doing a complete randomization of dates. We didn't want all of the decoys to be deployed in one single week in consecutive days. We didn't feel like that would be providing a true representation of a property search effort throughout the entire season. And so as you can see, we had 4 blocks. This would need to be modified slightly, given that in future years we would start on September 15th. But we think that something along these lines would be useful going forward. So what are we actually measuring? Obviously, the discovery rate is a metric that's identified in the KSHDP and within a property's respective PIP. The Sheraton and Royal Sonesta both claim that they will find 50% of downed seabirds. And as far as our measurements go, that's just a yes or no. Did they find the decoy within the reporting time? So from the point that I deployed the decoy to that 40 minutes before sunrise. Another metric that we thought very important to measure was the time to discovery. So how quickly are these decoys being found once they're placed out in the open? And this is really, we feel that this is very important because the longer, if these were live seabirds, the longer that they spend on the ground, the more time they have to find cover or be predated. And so a decoy is not a perfect representation of a live bird. A decoy that's placed out in the open in a field can still be found an hour before sunrise and gets counted in the discovery rate, but we don't know if it's truly representative of a live bird. Is that bird still going to be in that field 10 hours after it comes down? And we also recorded who found the decoy. Was it a member of the public? Was it staff at the property? And how it was found. So was it found during a dedicated downed seabird search? Was it found incidentally by accident? Or did someone just kind of stumble upon it? So I'll move into the 2 properties now, starting with the Royal Sonesta. These are just some of the changes that they made, and I'm sure that in their presentation, they will also touch upon these changes. And it's mostly in regards to the downed seabird, the searches themselves. I know that they increased their vegetation removal, hosted the training that DLEC provided, also conducted additional internal training to the security staff who were the primary searchers and participants of the dedicated seabird searches. And 3 personnel were assigned to solely search for seabirds during each shift in the AM and the PM. An infrared scope was used. They increased the seabird signage across the property just to inform guests and the public of downed seabirds and the need to report them. Also introduced was an incentive program for staff for finding downed seabirds and decoys, and daily reminders of seabird awareness just to the general staff as a whole. So the search effort on their side, obviously 7 days a week. The entire staff of over 350 people responsible for searching their respective areas. But like I said, there was a dedicated crew of 3 people, both in the morning and in the evening from the security staff who performed the searches and in line with the KSHDP guidelines of performing the PM search 3 to 4 hours after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise. And they were responsible for multiple things, the downed seabird searches, the turtle searches, and predator recording. Okay, so onto the results themselves. This is a map of the decoy locations. Those in green are ones that were found, and those in red are ones that were not found. The cover types, full or no cover or cover are represented by circles for no cover and squares for cover. I did not make a distinction on full cover versus partial cover in this map. And I know that there is potentially some discrepancies of what the Royal Sonesta considers to be their search area. And I just want to note that this map was based off of the 2021 survey, and I was not aware this year that there might be any discrepancies. So I went ahead and used the same boundary area for determining random points. So the discovery rate for the Royal Sonesta was 40%. They found 8 out of the 20 decoys. As you can see, 6 of those were open ones and 2 in cover. None of the 4 decoys in full cover were found. And the time to discovery is rather high. So looking at all the decoys, the average was 382 minutes, which is a little more than 6 hours. The 2 decoys in cover were not found for almost 10 hours. And the remaining 6 decoys that were found in the open was about 5 hours. So looking at the KSHCP guidelines, only 3 out of the 8 decoys were found either before or during their first dedicated search of the night. And even those that have a high amount of time that a potential bird would have spent on the ground. So all of these decoys were found by the security staff. I was not necessarily able to ascertain from all of the reports that came in if the security staff were the only ones actually finding the decoys or if they were reporting the decoy on behalf of another member of staff. It was something that I tried to ask, but wasn't always successful in getting that information. And no decoys were reported by anyone from the public. Comparing this data to the results from last year, obviously the discovery rate improved. Last year was 17%, 3 out of the 18 decoys were found, and then this year 40%, 8 of the 20 decoys were found. The time to discovery did increase significantly, although this is probably due to just this very small sample size that we have for both last year and this year, but especially last year, with only 3 decoys being found and this high range. And I think 2 of the decoys were actually found in 24 and 25 minutes respectively, and then 1 decoy being found in a very long time, which will raise that average. And I wanted to show just the comparison of where the decoys were between the 2 years. As you can see, they were fairly distributed across the entire property. And highlighting a couple of these areas, and this might be in the discrepancy area between the property boundaries, but at least from our results, it kind of shows that searches were not happening down along this perimeter road. Another area that had some difficulties was this lower back parking lot. Decoys in both 2021 and 2022 were not found in this area, including 2 that were in the open, illuminated by one of the street lights or the parking lot lights that are down in that area that we would have otherwise expected someone to find. And this interior courtyard area. Now this is very vegetated in here. There's plenty of cover for birds. So we understand that it is very hard to search that area, although decoys in both 2021 and 2022 placed in the open on lawns were missed in this area. And from 2022, at least, it appears that the decoys that were placed around high guest activity areas, so the pool and the restaurants and the valet parking lots, were being found for the most part, as compared to in 2021. Although it's not the same distribution of points, it does seem like the ones that were found are kind of in these same areas. And just showing some of the pictures from this year. This is the decoy I was talking about in the lower parking lot. It's rather visible. I feel like if someone was doing a complete search of this area should see that. This was reported, this is in the Duke's Valet parking lot area by the promenade. And this one took over 6 hours to be found. despite being fairly visible in the open. Another decoy in that back valet parking lot area. This one being in over 8 hours to be found. And then this one that was in the open, this was the decoy that was found the quickest of the Royal Sonesta decoys in 23 minutes. Yeah, so I just wanted to show some examples of where the decoys were this year. And I'm sure that this will also get touched on later in their final report, but just mentioning that there were 5 total seabirds, live seabirds recovered, including 3 Nesh. The time that those Newell shearwater were found varied. I believe the bird at 4:30 was found on the roof, so it's probably not representative of the actual time that that bird came down. I'm assuming it came down the previous night, but I guess there's not really any way to confirm that. So it just highlights the need to have multiple searches from throughout the night. If you were only to do one survey in the PM, you might miss this midnight bird or other birds that would come down earlier or later in the night. And that's just a picture of where that bird was found, deep in this vegetation. Again, pretty surprised that it actually was found. And again, this shows where those live seabirds were recovered in comparison to where the decoys are. So the discussion for this, obviously the searcher efficiency improved from 17 to 40%, and fewer of the obvious decoys were missed. So those are the decoys that are out in the open that I would consider that should be found. So in 2022, 60% of those decoys were found compared to 30% in the year prior. The time to discovery is still very high. I know that this is not something that is expressly agreed upon in the KSHCP, but it's worth noting because, again, live seabirds do not behave like a decoy. It's unlikely that a bird is going to be sitting out in the open for more than a couple hours, certainly not all night. So those decoys that were in the open that were found later in the morning, if that had been a real bird, might not actually still be there. And it also opens up birds to predation. 75%, so 6 out of the 8 decoys were found in those areas that I called the high guest activity areas. So around the pool, around the restaurant. So again, we just kind of want to emphasize that participants agreed to search their entire property. While it's potentially more likely that birds are going to be falling out in these certain areas based on the lighting, there's always the potential that birds are going to fall out in other places that we're not expecting. And so to just continue to search those other areas is still important. And another note is that no decoys were found after November 11th, including 3 that were in the open areas. And this potentially indicates that there might have been some complacency throughout the season as they move towards the end of the fallout season. Search intensity might not have been as high as it was earlier on, but we're not able to say that for sure. So I'll open it up to any questions on the Royal Sonesta results right now.
Committee members, do you have any questions for Johnny or comments on the presentation? Loyal, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Quick question on, do you have any estimate of the percentage of the propertiers in your 3 cover types?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Do you have any estimate of how much of the property is in each of the 3 cover types that you were using?
Oh, I do not. Yeah, I was not looking at like that detailed of a breakdown of the cover types. We did exclude certain areas. So the tops of buildings, obviously, we're not able to deploy in a pool just for like logistical reasons, all areas where birds can come down. So that would kind of change the potential for the certain areas. But yeah, in general, I do not know the percentage of cover types.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'll move on to the Sheraton. Oh,
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, one real quick question. I mean, the estimated or what's used in the calculations, 50% discovery rate. From your experimental tests, do you think that your results are truly representative of what that discovery rate would be expected to be? Or I'm just trying to think. I mean, it's obviously a slightly different situation from real birds being found on the property and the timing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, do you think this is a reasonable approximation? If you say 40%, is 40% probably something better to use?
I think it is, but I think that there are kind of a lot of caveats to that. So obviously with the randomization and where points fall can make certain areas harder to search, or like the likelihood that a decoy is found. I think that, and maybe Dilek has a better opinion on this, but I think it does show that there is definitely an increased search efficiency and awareness of birds. So I think it is closer to the correct approximation, but from just, even having just these 2 years, I would, and a rather small sample size, like if we really wanted to determine this, you'd repeat this multiple times again with larger sample sizes. Dilek, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just a quick. I agree with Johnny, and just to add on that, I think there are many factors contributing to the searcher efficiency, and it's probably changing annually as well, changing depending on the staff. If there's one motivated personnel, for example, they can change the whole results, and depends on the training that they are receiving that year, depends on the motivations behind. Like we know some participants are using incentive programs. I think it depends on many factors, and it probably varies year to year, even within the season, like as Johnny was presenting the results. And of course, it's very difficult to make a clear conclusion, but it seems like their effort changed after November, or maybe before. But anyways, these are all the things that can be measured. But I think the only conclusion we can draw from this is we should repeat this, if not annually, then periodically. So then we're on top of what's the search efficiency. We shouldn't assume that we come up with one number and it is the search efficiency for this participant. That's all I think we can conclude.
Well, just a quick follow-up is I realize that not many birds are coming down in real time in terms of live birds, and you in some ways tried to replicate that by the reduced number of birds that you're putting out as decoys. I'm just wondering though, from an experimental design though, is if you say increase, and you said you put up to on distribution night you put up to 20 birds or something like that. I mean, increase your number that you're actually putting out there. Would that not give you a better idea in terms of their recovery rate, in terms of how they're doing it, and you get away from some of your problems with very, very small sample size that you're dealing with in terms of your comparisons? I mean, it seems to me that would make some sense.
Yes, I agree with the experimental designs. We can definitely like increasing the sample size is something we're still limited by the sample size, not the 20 birds is still not a bad number, but when it comes to birds found, to draw conclusions or to draw detailed conclusions. We're still limited because the found birds are 8 or 6. I agree, increasing the sample size is one thing, but this was also a discussion with Stephen and Andre and Mark Travers as well. When it comes to realistic scenario, we're not sure if having, for example, putting 50 decoys is realistic in terms of number of birds that can be grounded or that are grounded in a season. I don't know if we really have to replicate the realistic scenarios or if we can just go for completely experimental designs and increase the sample size up to a degree where we draw more solid conclusions. But yeah, that's a question. But certainly I agree that increasing the sample size would be helpful, at least to 30.
Yeah, I mean, because the main question really is searcher efficiency and how well they can find things. And it doesn't have to replicate really what is coming down in real life. It really is to see how well they can search and how well they can find. And so having a larger sample size, I think, would be a better estimate of what that would be.
Yes, and just a note on that. As Joni mentioned, we started a little late this year because of planning and logistic problems, but I think now with the 2 years experience and the method is already established and participants are also familiar with the method, if this is to be repeated again, I think there's more chances to increase the sample size and start, or at least we know staffing needs for this project, etc. So we're much more, we have much more experience right now. I think it will be possible in the coming years.
And then one other question, this is a more general one, is with the results that you have, is there any attempt to change the take calculation for the different projects based upon the results that are coming in from the searcher efficiency trials, or is it still being pegged at basically 50% discovery?
I think maybe this is more of an admin question.
Yeah. Jim, this is Lisa Bale here in the conference room. And again, I apologize. I'm here in the DOFA conference room because I thought the ESRC members would be here and I could be face-to-face with you today when Reggie could not. I did submit a letter regarding this study saying because Reg is not available, we can't address it completely. But I did want to let folks know that we do take this seriously. We do especially appreciate DLEC's efforts to meet with us to work on training for our staff. I think that was very helpful to have her meeting with our team, giving them suggestions. We were then able to take those suggestions and roll them out not only to the dedicated search team, but to the larger security team that is out and about on the property more in the nighttime than other staff are. And then to the more than 300 people that are all trained in Seabird response. Some of your questions on representativeness, I think, again, I need Reg's help to address. One thing that I noted is that the map used for the study area differs than the approved permit area in our permits itself. So there are some differences for our purposes today. I don't think that's a substantial change, but it would change the results somewhat. I think there are also some differences because live birds are different than the decoys. So a live bird would have movement, probably not noise. The live birds have odor, which sometimes helps somebody who's close by detect them, and they also defecate. And sometimes, especially in a paved environment at a resort like this, you might see the defecation markings that would indicate a bird is nearby. So the property, I think Johnny did a good job describing some of the changes that the property made. Another unique thing that we look forward to talking with ESRC about is some of our different search techniques this year. All I can give you is some anecdotal evidence, but one of the things we did, and I know our general manager, Paul Toner, offered a comment in the chat about the infrared scopes. So our question this year was whether infrared scopes would help the searchers in any way. We felt they certainly wouldn't hurt using those. Unusually, the infrared scope, or perhaps not unexpectedly, the infrared scopes are actually very valuable in finding predators on property and helping us focus our predator control. So I think that's something that everybody might want to talk more about. And again, I'm not a biologist. I think that, we don't have anything conclusive, even with anecdotal evidence on those being able to find the downed birds, because the birds that we have always found on this property tend to be huddled close to the light source that they came down. So a roof overhang with a light underneath, they will be close to that area. So we're not finding the birds with the infrared scopes, but another client is also using the infrared scopes and has found them very helpful in observing nene. So I think question whether, they might be helpful finding live birds, and that's something we should continue. So I think that's, again, a discussion for the biologists, not the attorneys, and I don't profess any competence there to address those questions without Reg. But I think there are some things that, we need to keep talking about in this study. And I just wanted to conclude by saying this study really does have our full attention. We're taking it very seriously. We look forward to working with the agencies and figuring out what the best response is. When Sonesta gives its presentation at the next meeting, we can go into more detail on all of the different things we did to change searcher efficacy. I think we can say some of those did have an effect. Probably one of the biggest ones was removing a lot of the vegetation from the property, including areas that birds might be down. So there are a lot of different factors that are going into search efficacy, and I think we really need a team of people to continue working on this. But I think the best I can, because I'm not a biologist and I can't, respond on the details on the biology side, the best I can say is this really does have our full attention, and we look forward to, working further with the agencies to figure out how we can continue to improve. Getting back to the last question, that was, how does this affect the take calculation? And I think that's up to the agencies to decide. I don't think that's CASER answering those questions. The agencies came up with the take calculation, and if there's a change to that, again, I think that's initiated by the agencies. So I'll stop there.
Hi, Melissa. I know you got your hand. Thanks, Lisa. I know Melissa has her hand up. Just because Lisa mentioned it, that there was a comment in the chat. I just wanted to remind you that we need to remember that the audience is on, watching on YouTube. So, Paul, can you make your comment?
I'm sorry, the comment that I wrote in the chat?
Yeah, can you just read that aloud for us? Thanks.
Yeah, the question was, do the decoys take into account that if you're using infrared, are we going to use decoys in the future that would be able to pick up, that the infrared would be able to pick them up? Because, as Lisa explained extremely well, that decoys and live birds have two different aspects with respect to that. And secondly, when you take a look at a live bird versus a decoy, we have guests and so forth would be able to identify them much sooner than just having a decoy that's out there. And that would also increase our efficiency.
Sorry, can you say that last bit again? I couldn't quite follow you.
With a live bird, our guests would be able to identify that versus a decoy. So if they see a decoy that's out there on the beach, a guest wouldn't necessarily, we're not sending out announcements. If you find a live decoy, a decoy, please bring it to the security. They'll bring a live bird and they'll let us know with respect to that, but they wouldn't be ones, raising their hands and saying, oh, I guess some kid left their duck out there. So that's kind of a little bit of a fault into those type of decoys, because it does expand the amount of people that are out there looking for things.
I guess so, but I'm concerned that you rely on guests to increase your searcher efficiency up till I don't think that you should be relying on your guests to meet your obligations.
No, we're not relying upon our guests. I'm just saying that, it
sounds like a lot.
Oh, well, we do put the training, we put the announcements in every guest room. We work with the whole community to identify that. So,
Lainey, if I can clarify there. So,
okay.
what the permit requires is that we educate the guests about seabirds. We do not encourage or rely upon them to search. Doing that would be sending our guests out, in the evening hours in low light conditions during seabird season, and we don't want to encourage people out of their rooms, nor would they know how to, properly handle a bird. The staff is trained in what to do if somebody finds a bird, so they know the appropriate response. So we don't want to send untrained people out looking for birds. At the same time, we do want awareness, and so we, as we describe in our annual report and we'll present at the next meeting, we do things like guest education through cards. We've increased the signage, and all we ask the guests to do is to alert a staff member if they find a bird, so that there can be an appropriate response. But we don't rely upon guests as searchers, nor do we encourage it.
Okay, thanks. Melissa, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to save broader comments until all of the presentation is finished. But just a couple of follow-ups on Jim's comments and questions earlier. I do think it's really important to note that when we're talking numbers like 3 and 8 and sample sizes of 18 and 20, I haven't seen any statistics presented, and I'm guessing it would be a little bit difficult with these low sample sizes. And so even though we see 3 and 8, that's a difference of 5, right? And I feel like that's possible for that to be within a margin of error. So just want to note that when it's really small sample sizes. And the other thing to note in response to Tim's question is when as far as this is, how representative this is this compared to actual searcher efficiency? I think it's really important to remember that these are not smelly to the predators. So these decoys are a very minimum check on whether you can visually see stuff, whether you're looking. They don't take into account at all the number of animals that would disappear due to predators. And so when we combine this with the previous presentation showing that at a number of sites, adequate predator control isn't taking place or no predator control is taking place. And again, I realize there's multiple sites here, so this comment is maybe more broadly speaking. And then you see these low searcher efficiencies. Combination is what concerns me, because this should be an absolute minimum standard of, we saw the thing, it looked out of place, we found it. And I assume your searchers have been alerted to the fact that they're going to be tested with decoys. And so the fact that they're not found is really concerning, given that they're sitting there all day long, they're not disappearing due to a predator. So the opportunity for discovery is there and is much higher compared to a real animal. To me, ask for a broader discussion on this later. This highlights perhaps the need for search dogs or something like that, such as used are at the wind farms.
So when do we discuss that, if not now? Because once we leave this agenda item, I don't think we can talk about it anymore.
I don't think we're done on this agenda item, right? There's more sites to be presented. So that's why I was just thinking maybe you can make it through all the site presentations and then we can have a broader discussion that's not necessarily specific to an individual site, but broader.
That's fine, as long as we don't punt it to the end of the day and then we can't talk about it.
Yeah. I just wanted to open it up for immediate questions on the Royal Sonesta side of things, and felt like this was a good time to do it.
How many more slides do you have?
Just one more for the Sheraton.
Okay.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, then I will continue on. So onto the Sheraton. Some of their changes that were made were primarily relating to their search protocols for the downed seabirds. Again, doing twice daily dedicated seabird searches, having 4 to 5 people solely looking for seabirds during those times, And at the Sheraton, they used flashlights following a mapped route, looking in vegetation lines, covered areas, open areas, some of the places that Deleck identified as might needing more searches. And they also introduced an incentives program for both the staff and members of the public to find downed seabirds as well as decoys. So again, just kind of showing the general search effort here. Pretty much the same that was mentioned on the previous slide. So the results, here's the distribution of decoys. Again, same as the previous map. The green were decoys that were found and the red were not found. As you can see, most of the decoys that were not found were in cover along the peripheries of the property. So they found 13 out of the 20 decoys, a 65% discovery rate, and 9 of the 10 decoys in the open were found, as well as 4 of the 10 decoys in cover. All 4 of those decoys in cover were in partial cover, so neither site found any of the decoys that were in full cover. The discovery time for the Sheraton was much lower. For all decoys, it was about 76 minutes. When just looking at the 4 decoys in cover that were found, that time raised to about 2 hours. And decoys in the open were found in about 60 minutes. So fairly soon after I was putting them out. And many of these were actually found before the first dedicated search of the night. As I mentioned, 12 out of the 13 were found by 4 hours after sunset, but many of these were actually found well before that time frame. So how were all of these found? Again, no members of the public reported any of these decoys, and I think that does, in response to some of the comments, kind of highlights how people or guests are probably more aware of a live seabird than they are of a decoy. You might just think it is a toy sitting out. And unless you really investigate it and look under it, where the instructions are saying, like, please report this, even if you are a member of the public, it doesn't matter. Like, it is valuable information. I think that is kind of a discrepancy between the decoys and the live birds. Anyways, 8 of the 13 decoys were found during the specified designated searches by the staff who were solely out there to look for seabirds. And 3 of the decoys were found by staff members who used their free time. And so I think this is in response to the incentives program. They were being rewarded to spend their free time or downtime at work to go out and look for decoys and seabirds as well. And 2 of the decoys were found incidentally. So these were just by staff members who were going about their normal work duties and happened to see that decoy. Comparing this to last year, obviously it's a little difficult when only 1 decoy was found in 2021. So the maps do look completely different. But it does kind of highlight certain areas. Obviously here there was 2 clusters of decoys placed out in the open in 2021. Obviously none of those were found. And in 2022, all of them were found. So it just kind of shows that there really is, I think it shows that there really is a increased search effort and just being aware and seeing those decoys and recognizing what to do. And again, kind of where the decoys were not found is along these peripheries. Some of them on the southern edge were fairly close to decoys in 2021. And again, just some of the pictures. This one was not found. It was in the northern pool area. This decoy kind of under the vegetation line, again, highlights that these areas are being searched. I think it's safe to say that this decoy would not have been found in previous years. It's not something that's easily visible. If you were just walking along, scanning the grass, you kind of have to be actually looking under that vegetation to find it. This was the 1 decoy that was placed in the open that wasn't found. I forgot to highlight it here, but it is on the vegetation line. You can kind of see it against the feather or against the flowers over there. This is on kind of the northern service road. So out of the way, but still something that I would have expected to be found. As it is in a fairly lit area, I felt like I was able to see the decoy. Obviously, I had knowledge of it being there, but you could see it from fairly far away, even more so if you had a flashlight. And this decoy was just one of the 4 that was in that cluster out in the open and reported in 45 minutes. The light is from the picture taking, not representative of how it actually was. It was quite dark in this area. I couldn't see the decoy when I deployed it from even 10 feet away. So again, just kind of shows that they really are searching those areas with flashlights more so than they were previous years or last year. And just briefly going over the live seabirds that were found here, we received reports and SOS did of 16 total birds, 8 mules, and 8 wedge-tail shearwaters. And I wanted to include this because I was able to compare how the live seabirds were found compared to how the decoys were found. And it again kind of highlights the incentives program, I think really increasing the total search effort from the participant. 5 of the 16 downed birds were found by staff members just spending their free time looking for seabirds because they wanted to get that reward. And that number is similar to what we had in the decoys. So like most of the birds are not actually being found during those designated searches. They're by people who are just aware of the issue and knowing what to do if they do see a downed seabird. And one of these birds of the Newell shearwaters was actually found and reported by a guest. And as far as timing goes, all these birds were found between about 7 and 11 o'clock. So really showing that first search of the night, whether it is the dedicated search or just having people out there aware, is very important, as this is when most of the birds are coming down, and at least when they're being found. Obviously that you have more people out during these evening hours compared to early in the morning, which could be part of that factor. And this is just showing where the live birds were compared to the decoys. Interestingly, all the Newells for the most part were clustered around this pool, and the wedge-tail shearwaters were kind of spread out, but a lot of them were along the road. So the discussion for the Sheraton, obviously the searcher efficiency improved from 5 to 65%. And again, this is a small sample size, so we can't say for certain that this is what it's going to be going forward every single year, but it just does highlight that there is actual searching going on this year. And 9 out of the 10 decoys that were in no cover out in the open were found. Again, this is the decoys, and any bird that's out in the open, I would expect that all of them get found. That would be as close to ideal. Obviously, we want all the birds to be found, but realistically, the ones that go down into cover or that have time to find the cover are not going to always be found. But I think at a minimum, in the future, any decoy that's placed in the cover should be, or in the open, should be found. They found 40% of the decoys in cover. So again, that's just showing that they are really searching those areas that are likely to have a seabird duck into as their first available cover. Those vegetation lines, which I think is really important. Both these properties have a large amount of vegetation cover, and it's not realistic to cut back all of it. So in the absence of removing it or cutting it back, searching it is very important, especially those first initial areas where a bird's going to duck into. And again, noting that there were many more live birds that were found this year compared to just 2 last year. There's many factors that go into that, obviously, but I think it does just show that there is a higher awareness from the staff on the plight of seabirds and finding them and knowing what to do if you do see a seabird. And again, just the decoys that were missed were on the peripheries of the property. It is important to be vigilant in areas where even historically birds have not come down, just because there's always that possibility. And so search efforts shouldn't just be focused where the lights are, where the birds are coming down historically, but they do need to be across the entire property. So I just have one more slide that's just kind of our general observation. So I'll just run through this real quick and then move into questions again for either the Sheraton or just in general comments. So we do want to first off congratulate both participants in improving their search efficiency. Again, it is a small sample size, but we do feel like, and especially from me being out there in person and seeing people doing these seabird searches, it did appear like there was much more effort being put into looking for downed seabirds. We want to remind everyone to just maintain stable search effort throughout the season. Again, don't just focus on areas where birds have fallen out in the past or where there's lights. And as always, just increasing the search effort in covered areas. I understand these are very hard places to search sometimes, but really just those edges, I think, are a lot of birds could be found that may have been missed in the past. And highlighting the time to discovery, that's very important. We've kind of gone over this a lot, that the decoys are not like birds. A decoy that's out in the open for 10 hours is probably going to be found, but a live seabird's not going to do that, or it's unlikely to. And that each participant and property, they have different challenges, different considerations for each one. So we shouldn't necessarily be comparing one property or one participant to another, but they just need to be compared to themselves. And Dilek also mentioned this, but just we highly recommend repeating these searcher efficiency trials at some 3 years, 5 years, doesn't necessarily need to be every year, but just to ensure that the standards are being met throughout the duration of the KSHCP. So yeah, we can open it up to just questions now.
All right, thank you, Johnny. So I was wondering if we had any specific questions about the Sheraton, and then we can, as Kavika mentioned, we can sort of then go on to the sort of more broader questions and see if there's any action items from the committee. So do we have any specific questions about what Johnny just presented?
I'll just note, I wanted to commend them for the incentives program. It seems like a great idea and one that gets people excited. So just want to commend them for that program.
I had a question on that. Was the incentive program, were they given the incentive for finding a live bird, or were they given an incentive for finding a decoy as well?
It was for both live birds and decoys, and also included wedge-tail shearwaters.
I see.
And I think the Sheraton, I think there were 25 people that ended up qualifying for finding either decoys or live birds.
Okay, and is that incentive program going to continue on into the future, or is that just for this trial, during the searcher efficiency trial? Because do you know?
I do not know, but I'll open that up to Sheraton representative.
Is there someone from the Sheraton who can answer that question?
Good morning again. This is Mike Bellis for the record, representing Sheraton Kauaʻi. In response to your specific question, the issue has not been discussed about the incentive program or how it's going to continue into the future. We do know that it was done at the urging of the general manager, Chip Bayhuth, who should be commended. Initial discussions were about much more nominal incentive of $50 to $100. He increased it dramatically to $250, and it was to include everyone. And what the experience was, based on what little I know right now, not having dealt directly with guests, customers, and visitors to the property, is that several people commented on the educational value of the cards that were left behind and placards and explaining the incentives. And not just young children, but there were adults who were enthusiastic about participating and actually searching for the decoys and for down birds. And I know it may sound trivial, but the fact is that it did prove to be successful at the end of the day. And to have a profound and dramatic improvement of 5% last year to 65% this year in the efficacy trials, I think really underscores the commitment of Sheraton, the general manager, Chip Bayhuth, and Don Sheldon, the loss prevention supervisor, who has taken responsibility for this. And I would like to add, at my age and having been in government for 15 years and being in private practice now for 35 years, I would frequently hear reference made to partnership between government and private enterprise. This is one of the few times where I actually saw that become a reality with enthusiasm and true cooperation. And I'd like to thank, in particular, Dilek and Kate for their cooperation, help and support at the beginning of last year, helping with the training with Dan Sheldon, and in turn, I think motivating and helping the entire program at the hotel to be successful. Because as you can tell by all the people who were searching, weren't committed to the searching assignment staff, but who were there on their own free time, who spent the extra effort. Some, yes, presumably for the incentive, but also just because of more of awareness of the endangered species and the need to do all things necessary to preserve and protect them. So I applaud the client. I'm very proud of them and what they were able to accomplish with the help and support of both state and Fish and Wildlife. And I'm looking forward to continuing this. And circling back to your original question, it is my belief that with the success this year, that the incentive program will continue next year, but I don't have a definitive statement from the manager. And it's not something that's been specifically addressed, but I do know that there is a commitment to improving beyond what we've done this year.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'm really glad to see the improvement, and thanks for acknowledging that, the steps that have been taken and the partnership with KESERP and the state that's led to these improvements. I'm glad to see that. I guess I'm glad to hear that there's a possibility the incentives program may continue. That's good, and seems like a really, really cost efficient way to increase searcher efficiency. So I'm hoping it does continue. Otherwise, if it does not, I'm a little concerned that this might be somewhat of an anomaly, and that the percentage might decrease in future years. But
there's a commitment, as Lisa Bale did, that this is something that we're taking very seriously. We're committed to improving, as I said previously, and when we do have the presentation at the next meeting in April, these are issues obviously that I'll raise with the general manager, with the staff, and we'll have more definitive responses to your questions and to your observations and comments about future efforts at the hotel.
Okay, great, thank you. I had one more question for Johnny. I'm not sure if you can answer this question or not. If you can't, that's fine. Do you know, is there certain people who are tending to find more birds, both decoys and live birds? Is there like star performers who are just like finding a disproportionate number, do you think, or is it fairly just random?
I think there are certain people that enjoyed going out, and certainly the rewards program probably helped that to some extent. I believe one specific person found 3 decoys and 2 live birds. I don't have that information directly on hand. But we were provided the end of season reports by the Sheraton, and it said who found all of them and how they were found. So like if it was a designated search or incidentally or whatever, for both decoys and live birds.
Okay, thanks.
Lainey, are we shifting now to broader questions beyond just the Sheraton?
I think if we're done, then yeah, I just want to see, is there any more specific questions regarding that presentation?
Well, I had some questions about the presentation, but are we shifting away from the specific participant of the Sheraton to the broader presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that came across as I was listening to the presentation is the comparison to last year. And I just want to note that I feel like last year was an extremely low bar that is not in compliance with the expectations of the HCP. And so I don't think the standard should be improvement from last year. The standard should be that they're meeting the obligations of the HCP. And I just want to guard against that sliding standard of like, just because an applicant set an extremely low bar in the first year doesn't mean that they get to claim they're doing great just because they exceeded an abysmal number last year. So just want to kind of guard against that a little bit while saying, good, I'm glad improvement is there. This has been a very long time coming. And I hope that we continue to get closer to compliance with the expectations. And again, making a note that given that they're not meeting the numbers that are in the calculations in the HCP, and that this is a pretty low bar because it doesn't even include predator take of these individuals away from the space, that we shouldn't be giving them the benefit of this 50% and 90% finding rate.
Just a small comment. Thank you very much, Ms. For making that additional comment. I think it's super important. And I would like to highlight that one part, the Royal Sonesta is still 40%, even there's an improvement, and Sheraton it's still 60%. So it's, as you're saying, it's still not very high searcher efficiency. And it's not combined with predator control as well. So I definitely second their comment.
But again, oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle. You start talking first.
You know, to me, it boils down to what was the assumption made in the permit, right? So 60% might be fine, or 40% might be fine, if that's what the assumption was at the time that the take estimation was made. So I'm guarding against saying whether it is good enough. I think that the agencies need to really go through and say, what is the current discovery rate as it is determined right now, and what is it relative to their permit? And for each one of the permittees, it's a little bit different. A lot of people have the standard 50%, but not all of them. I agree that there's ongoing things with predator control. Not going to get into that right now, but I do appreciate the openness of the permittees to continually working through adaptive management to get their discovery rate to the level that it was assumed to be in their permit, because that's the critical factor for me. And that adaptive management needs to keep going. It's going to have to be an every year thing. And you're going to have turnover in your searchers, you're going to have turnover in your outreach and education components. All of those things are going to have to be managed pretty carefully on a year-to-year basis in order to maintain a discovery rate that is consistent with the permits. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, it's sort of related to that same point there. First of all, I think this study is extremely valuable, and I do feel that it really needs to be part of the ongoing practice in terms of keeping up on the effectiveness of the search efforts. I think it's a real critical thing. I got a couple of questions. One is right now calculations are based on that 50% discovery rate. And for the years that it's not up to that amount, is there a recalculation of the discovery of the take amount, or are we just saying that that just falls into that? And then secondly, is the other thing is in some ways I feel that the results are a little bit of an overestimate of what the discovery rate is, and particularly for the open areas, because the discovery time is a very important piece of this whole thing. And if there's a certain amount of time that if they don't find the bird by that time, it's going to scurry into the, you know, a live bird would scurry into the vegetation. And so if it takes, you know, many hours beyond that sort of estimated threshold of when they would seek cover, I question whether if they finally discover a bird in the open area beyond that time, whether it should be counted as a full discovery of a bird in the same way that it would be otherwise. In other words, maybe it should be calculated as part of the percentage that would be in the closed vegetation. Getting that, so somehow or other, decreasing its weight in terms of the calculation for it too. So these are some tweaks, but again, I think overall, I think this is a very important tool to have on a regular basis, to be able to really see where we are relative to what that take estimate really is.
Loyal, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm really pleased to see the changes to try to improve the searcher efficiency on that. So I give kudos to that, and kudos for doing this kind of small searcher efficiency study. So I want to start with that for sure. There are a couple things though that I do think would help with this whole concept of take and trying to get a handle on what that is. And this goes back to statements we made, 3 years ago when we were talking about the HCP approval. And we've made these assumptions that we can do the search for things and get X amount, that we'll do predator control and that's effective. But we haven't locked in and tried to actually validate those numbers. And I think we really do need to do that. And in the HCP, I think it's in section 6.8.2, it talks about, the regulatory agencies being able to come in and do some additional effectiveness monitoring studies. And I really think it's imperative to do that. So I think that, we need to, once again, I want to say that we need to actually come up with a really good, not just searcher efficiency, but carcass retention study or removal study, and do that for the properties. In addition to doing general searches during the key fallout times with canines across the properties to see whether or not, you don't have like an order of magnitude difference in the amount of fallout that's occurring on these sites. So I really think it's a matter of having the agencies come in with an acceptable care, SERF or SEAF, and then canine studies of just general fallout for across all of the properties, including the ones that don't have much going on, just to validate whether or not they do have much fallout and that sort of stuff. So I really think we have to do that. Otherwise, we're using these surrogates for how we're reducing take or how much take there is without really the appropriate metrics to say what it is. And so we need to supercharge kind of for a few years anyway, looking across all the properties to see what's actually going on. So I do want to mention that. I think that's really, really important. Thanks.
Do we have any more committee questions or discussion?
I guess I have one more point on that. This one actually does go back to the the Sheraton one. With the difference in the fallout areas between the newels and the wedgies, is there any difference in the lighting sources there between the area around the pool versus along the road?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously there are different types of lights around the pool area. Those are more for guests, and then you have the just general street lights. So it's kind of hard to compare those. They're just like different colors of lights, different intensities. And so I don't know if there's some behavioral reason on the birds side of things on why the newels are concentrated in one area versus the wedgies along the road. And of course, that's also not taking into account previous years. So I don't have like full records of where birds in last year or years prior also fell out to compare. Like it might have just been kind of one odd year. But the area where the newels did fall out is more of the restaurants and where the pool was, and kind of the lighting that would be illuminating the beach.
Okay, thanks. And one thing, since if the future shows that there's this massive difference between the covered areas and the open areas with respect to searcher efficiency, then it probably is going to be really important to do a better job of calculating the percentages of the properties that are in open, partial cover, and full cover, and unsearched to come up with a better take estimate. But that's for down the road after we get a little more information.
I'll just finalize my thoughts, Lainey, by continuing to reiterate that adaptive management loop is pretty darn critical. And as we look through the annual reports and pull together specific comments, I would urge each of the permittees to really look at what they did last year, what worked, what didn't, where there are gaps in their ability to meet their discovery rate, where their predator control plan might need some tweaking or some work. Or those covered properties that do have lights that do not currently have predator control active, added or not. Those are things that really do need to get identified and addressed prior to the next fallout season. And that is going to take some work. It doesn't happen quickly. So we are in March right now, but getting squared away with those changing implementation plans before the end of August, beginning of September, is a workload. And I'm always conscious of the fact that time moves faster than I want it to. And I continue to encourage each of the permittees to really spend some time on that now, so that they have a good idea of what they're doing and they have coordinated with the agencies in preparation for the next fallout season.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Lainey.
I see, Loyal, you have your hand up. I just wanted to quickly mention something that Johnny mentioned, and also Lisa mentioned earlier about where the fallout birds were found, and if they're in particular areas, but that potentially is biased by those are the areas that are easier or more heavily trafficked or lit up and more frequently people around. And just because birds are found in well-lit areas doesn't mean they're not in harder to find areas. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone, but I just wanted to point that out again, that there is a potential pretty significant amount of bias in where birds are found versus where they could be and are not found, because if you don't find them, you don't know they're there. So it's really important to keep that in mind in those less heavily trafficked and darker areas. Loyal, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the agencies probably should be looking at some of these assumptions that were made in the HCP with respect to take and and can start some of it on something really easy and obvious, which was the SOS releases in the survivalship, which has been now documented in publications, and that probably needs to be re-examined. And as you get more information from full-blown carcass retention and searcher efficiency studies, and then having canines go through, you can then look at the aspects of what happens to birds once they hit the ground. So I do think that that needs to be ongoing. And the first thing I mentioned, first looking at the SOS releases and the survival of those, that can be done immediately because we already have that data in hand, right? The other stuff can follow as you are comfortable with the amount of information that you're getting. But regardless, that does need to be done. And this year's studies have shown that, the permittees, individual groups like Sheraton, et cetera, can make a big difference based on what they do. So there is hope to kind of get a lot of that stuff up to where it's very beneficial to the birds. And that is appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks, Loyal. Do we have any requests for action items for the next meeting? I just want to make sure we capture those.
Well, I'd like to know if the agencies are going to look at some sort of a recalculation on the take estimates, particularly with respect to the SOS mortality rate for released birds.
I think we'll have to discuss that. We can get back to you on that in the next meeting. And sorry, are you specifically talking about the searcher efficiency percentage?
No, the mortality of released SOS birds and credit for.
Oh, okay.
The other stuff I think is important too, but you maybe want to lay out how you want to do it in order to have the best impact on estimating take for the other stuff like care and searcher efficiencies and bringing canines just to do general searches during the fall.
Okay. Sorry, just taking some notes. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Is there any comments or testimony from the public? First of all, in person. Okay.
No, the only person who's in person is Lisa, and we haven't had anybody request Zoom access who's not already either a participant or a member of the committee.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Then I believe we've finished with item 3. I wanted to see, it's now 12:18. We've got one more agenda item that could take a while. Does the committee want to take a lunch break now? And if so, how long would you like? Or do you want to get started at least on one of the sections of item 4? Just want to see how you feel.
If the next agenda item is going to take a while, I do need to eat.
Yeah.
If we can take a 45-minute break, would that be possible? I need to probably go to another location.
Okay, so we make it 1 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll recess till 1 o'clock. Thank you. See you back at 1.
And same web link.
Yes. Yeah, you can just stay, if you want, you can just stay on and turn off your camera. Or you can rejoin.
Okay, and Lainey, this is Loyal. So I can stay until 2 o'clock.
Okay.
And then I have to leave.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. I think we should still have quorum, so we should be okay, but thanks.